We are now calling this fourth meeting of the Antisemitism Commission to order. I will begin by asking Kyle Stapleton to please call the roll for members of the commission.
All right, we'll start with the commissioners in the room. Senator John Velas.
Here.
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 Jeremy Burton.
Here.
Jody Kipnis.
Here.
Peggy Shakur.
Here.
Robert Likens.
Here.
Dave Friedman.
Here.
Dar Kaufman.
Here.
Jill Hay.
Here.
Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller.
Here.
Jamie Hogue.
Here.
Michael Memelo.
Here.
Dina Papanikolaou.
Here.
And joining us remotely, we have Rep. Stephen Howitt. You can unmute yourself and say here.
Here.
Rita Blanter.
Here.
Superintendent Aaron Polanski.
Here.
Karen Sampson.
Here.
DA Paul Tucker. Chief Thomas Fowler.
Thank you, Kyle. The commission will now consider approval of the meeting minutes for our previous meeting on January 23rd. These minutes have been shared prior via email with the commission members and posted on the commission's website. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of approving, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The meeting has been approved. Now, before I turn it over to Representative Cataldo for some opening remarks, I also want to highlight a new member of our commission, Rita Blanter, who is joining us today virtually. Commissioner Blanter was recently appointed by Senate Minority Leader Senator Tarr to replace Commissioner Mark Friedman, who unfortunately needed to resign from the commission due to some personal time constraints. We thank Commissioner Mark Friedman for his work on the commission, and I'd like to recognize Commissioner Blanter now to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. I'm Rita Blanter, and I am honored to be joining this commission.
Thank you very much. I will now turn it over to my co-chair, Representative Cataldo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome everybody. Just a couple of logistical notes. We are delighted that there are so many folks here. You should know ahead of time that the acoustics in this room are very good. So if you think you're whispering in the back, the folks up front can hear you. And we want to make sure that everybody's able to hear the best that they can. Also understand that it is warm in here and some of you are standing up. We intend to go through the first two sets of speakers and then take a break. If you do feel like you need to leave during the meeting, of course, do so. We just ask that you try to be as quiet as possible. We have had some issues with interruptions of folks needing to leave. So thank you so much for your consideration on that. And unless there's anything else, without further ado, happy to bring up our first two speakers. Can folks in the back hear me okay? Okay, and just for the, so that the commissioners know, these speakers go online, but they don't project into the room. And so we will do our best to project in this crowded room. I also want to just take a moment to recognize that quite a few of our colleagues in the legislature are here or are represented by staff here. They include Representative Dom, Representative Vitolo, Representative Sangiolo, Representative Phillips, Representative Garbely, Representative Armini, Representative Kearns, Representative Gordon, Representative Gomez, and Senator Roush. And who did I miss? All right. Oh, Representative Stanley. Thank you, Representative. All right, good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
Mr.
Commissioners.
Page.
Good to
And
see you.
is it Ms. Antoline?
Miss Antoline, yes.
Antoline or?
Antoline, usually in
Antoline.
America anyway, yes.
Okay, all right. I'll try to keep that correct.
That's all
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for coming in. Thank you so much, especially since I know it was a busy day to get over here. As we've discussed, it's this commission's practice to ask the speakers to introduce themselves and make any presentation of about 10 minutes, followed by commissioner questions. We typically have a pretty hot bench here on the commission, but we'll also try to be respectful of your time and everybody else's. I do want to make a couple of points before we launch our discussion. My comments are not really directed at you, Mr. Page, because you and I have discussed your appearance before, but more to my colleagues on the commission and the members of the public. So first, this commission's focus is on addressing the ways that anti-Semitism shows up in Massachusetts and how it affects Jewish residents and others in the Commonwealth. It is not part of this commission's charge to unduly interfere with the internal operations of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, which is the largest and one of the most venerable labor organizations in our state, whose members are incredibly important contributors to our state. The MTA's activities or resources are only relevant here insofar as they affect teachers, students, and families experiencing and learning about anti-Semitism. Finally, although I of course do not speak for the MTA, the topics we're going to discuss, it's important to note, including curriculum or actions, are a small part of what the MTA does and what it works for on behalf of its members. Disagreeing with one part of an organization's activities does not make that person who might have that disagreement anti-union, and likewise in any organization, especially a large and diverse organization, there are very likely to be a diversity of opinions and perspectives. I'm personally very proud to be working to advance many of the objectives of the MTA members in my district this session, and I'm particularly proud to have co-filed one of the MTI's priority bills with my friend here, Co-Chair Vilas, on teacher retirement equity for teachers in our state who have taken some time off to raise children during the time that they're teachers. With that, I'll turn it over to Chair Vilas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to echo some of those sentiments. Obviously, we're here on a very specific topic, and we will engage in that back and forth. But just by way of background, I would just say that you are looking at someone right now who quite certainly, if it weren't for members of the MTA, teachers, para, staff, et cetera, I wouldn't have graduated Westfield High School. So this is all, we have enormous respect for the role that teachers and educators play throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Obviously, we are going to be talking about a topic today that may engender some back and forth, and that is fine. That is part of this process. But to echo the sentiments that were just said, this isn't an anti-union thing. This isn't an anti-MTA thing, teacher, educator, et cetera. We are here to hear you out about some of these resources, some of the things that MTA has done in terms of what's going on out there right now on this subject. But I can't stress enough, we are eternally grateful for the role that our educators play here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
With that, we'll
Great.
turn it over to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate those sentiments. So as you said, I'm Max Page. I'm president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association. I'm glad to speak on behalf of our union today, and I'm joined here by the most important person in this discussion, which is an actual educator, Jessica Anteline, teacher in the Lexington Public Schools. And I apologize for being a little late because both of us just came from the Museum of African American History, where I stood with Senator Markey and spoke at a press conference about defending public education, our students' ability to go to school, get the services they need, as well as our students and our educators' freedom to learn, which is under threat every day from this new administration. So in general, I don't believe that personal biographical information is essential as my role as president of the MTA, and I'm not really a believer that one's identity determines one's views on a particular matter, nor do I believe that simply being a member of a particular group gives one automatic privileged position in a debate. And in this small hearing room, there are Jews of many, many different political views and many others with many different political views. But given the attacks on me and our staff and our union, I thought it was important to at least set the stage on where I come from. My parents fled Ukraine in the pogroms and dislocations of World War I and to find a home in Camden, New Jersey. My father was born in Košice in eastern what is now Slovakia, grew up in Berlin, witnessed the rise of Hitler, was kicked out of his public schools for being Jewish, and finally, luckily for his immediate family, was able to flee to London, then New York, and finally to Cleveland. And over this past December break, I spent several days making my way through hundreds of letters from the 1930s exchanged between my father and his beloved grandmother and aunts and uncles and cousins. Those letters end in the early 1940s. All of my Košice relatives, save my Aunt Illa, were murdered at Auschwitz. A few cousins in Hungary were hidden by the help of righteous Gentiles and ended up making their way to Australia in 1956. But every time I gather with my father's side of the family, I'm sorry, I did not quite realize this would be affecting this way, and realize how many aunts and cousins I do not have, I am reminded of the fate of my family and European Jews at the hands of the Nazi regime. I understand the historical virulence of anti-Semitism. I understand the newly resurgent strains of anti-Semitism. And I'm too old and too confident in my experience and views to be lectured about the dangers of anti-Semitism. Our members teach according to the award-winning history and social studies curriculum, which they apply to every school district in the state. Our union supported Senator Roderick's legislation on teaching about the Holocaust and other genocides. In this past year, we have held workshops on anti-Semitism as well as anti-Palestinian attacks. I understand the real fears of our Jewish members as they witness a rising tide of anti-Semitism. I also hear the real fears of other groups, including Palestinian educators and students and those who speak out in solidarity with them, who have experienced attacks on their lives, their teaching, their research. My study of Judaism, which is replenished with participation in Shabbat and holiday services and study groups, has inspired the values I bring to the work in the MTA. By the front door of my house is a framed print of what I consider essential value in my tradition, tzedek tzedek tirdof, justice justice must you pursue. I'm a practicing Jew, a member and former president of my congregation. And in that life as a Jew, I try to live by one of the teachings of the ancestors, Pirkei Avot. Every argument for the sake of heaven will endure. It is why Jews are urged not to study alone, but with a chaver, a friend, a study partner, so that they might argue and through that argument get closer to the truth. We embrace debate, and debate necessarily means engaging with people and ideas who have starkly different views of the same issue. Beyond my personal experience of Judaism and anti-Semitism is my learning about how interconnected anti-Semitism is with other oppressions: white supremacy, Islamophobia, hatred of Asian American and Pacific Islanders, and unfortunately many more. My thinking has been shaped by the writing of Eric Ward, whose Skin in the Game charts the thinking of white nationalists who he, remarkably as a black man, was able to infiltrate as a journalist. Ward argues that anti-Semitism is at the heart of white nationalism. It was the Jews, goes the argument, that conspired with black people to undermine white power. To reestablish white Christian dominance, white nationalists believe, as you heard at Charlottesville and elsewhere, Jews must not replace us. We should not take from this statement that anti-Semitism is somehow more important than other hatreds. No, Ward is arguing that we cannot understand and therefore cannot combat racism and discrimination of all types unless we understand anti-Semitism and its connections to other forms of hate. In other words, as the charge of your commission says, to combat anti-Semitism and other similar forms of hatred, we need to be concerned with how anti-Semitic hate is connected, interwoven with, inextricably bound up with hatred of other people and their religions. For this commission to do its work fully and well, and I believe you want to do that, it must engage with all hatred, discrimination, and oppression. Combating anti-Semitism requires that commitment. The MTA is a diverse union of education workers, 117,000 educators across 400 locals in virtually every city and town, every public college and university campus. We are the largest union in New England. We are 180 years old, founded right about the time Horace Mann was fighting to institute the state and nation's greatest invention, I would argue, universal free public education for every resident. MTA is proud to lead the work with a broad network of unions and advocacy organizations to protect, defend, and advance our most important resource, an educated citizenry. Our union has been, over the course of our 180 years, a key force for the common good in this Commonwealth, and I appreciated the chair's comments at the beginning. Because of our union and educators throughout the state, we have the finest public education system in the country. With the support of the legislature, we have some of the best funded schools, although as we all recognize, we are in a real fiscal crisis right now, as well as the most qualified educators. Our union was crucial in stopping the privatization of public education in 2016 with a charter school amendment, passing the Student Opportunity Act in 2019. We made progress through weakening the destructive high-stakes testing regime, and have opened up a discussion about the real goals of our public schools and how to support and assess them. And we were a key force in winning passage of the Fair Share Amendment, which is paying for universal free school meals, free community college, free regional buses, a better tea, more childcare, greener buildings, repaired roads and bridges across the state. And I also am really proud that our union stood for universal sick leave for the $15 minimum wage and paid family medical leave for almost everyone. Doesn't include educators, I will note. So why has our union been involved in some issues which might seem far away from the core mission of public education? Because over the past decade or so, we have fully leaned into the commitment that if we care about our students within our school walls and on our campuses, we must care about their lives outside the school and college walls. Economic insecurity has a fundamental impact on our students' ability to learn. Our union's strength is in its democracy. Those of you unfamiliar with unions and how they operate may not understand that we have no admission test, we have no political purity test. We are the union of workers in public schools and colleges. Anyone in jobs in our bargaining units may join as a member of the MTA, and almost every single one does. The diversity of our workers and views is our strength. Over the past decade or so, we have embraced our democracy more fully than ever. We are among the most democratic unions in this country. We have over 40 member-led committees and task forces. All the money needed to run our union comes from our members in the form of dues voted on at our annual meeting, the largest annual democratic gathering in the state. No billionaires and their agendas influence us. We have a board of 70 elected by members in regions across the state. We do our best to encourage members' involvement in discussion and debate and decision-making, including this past weekend when we had a 2-day board meeting. So I don't want to speak about specific statements, workshops, resources, but I am here to defend our union and celebrate our democratic union, its members and staff. Our members are engaged in their work, but they also are engaged in their communities and politics more generally. Many look to our union to take the lead on issues within our schools and colleges, and, as I said earlier, outside school walls. Over the years, we have had plenty of healthy debates about issues beyond schools and colleges, our state, and even our nation. Members came to the board, proposed actions for the union around the war between Israel and Hamas, and the larger issue of Israel and Palestine. Some of these proposals were passed by the board, such as the ceasefire resolutions. Some were not. And I hope some of the critics have noted that recently a proposal was made to divest all of our investments from companies involved with military operations in Israel. After a healthy debate, our board chose to not single out Israel, but rather to ratify in policy what is already the case. Our union does not and will not invest in any military stocks. I have personally disagreed with some of the statements or the specific language used in motions approved by our board. While I've been impressed by some presentations in a workshop, I've been critical of others, even offended by still others. I also believe that as horrible as the murders of October 7th were, as terrible as the loss of life in Gaza has been, that this war and the larger question of Israel-Palestine is not the central focus of our work as a union. Within our membership, there has been robust debate about whether or not we should be engaging in these issues and what stance to take. It's been painful to see members divided from members over this issue, although we are hardly alone in feeling the tear of the debate around this situation. But I will defend every day the rights of my democratic union and its members to discuss, debate, learn, teach, and protest without fear of retribution. I will defend our outstanding staff for their professionalism and ethics in handling the issues that come at us and responding to directives from our board. And the notion that the union is trying to indoctrinate our young people is simply not true, and accusations to that effect have unfortunately led to death threats to me and my staff and to other attacks on our union. The educational resources that seem to be the focus of some were created out of a wish of the MTA board to provide members with some optional resources to consider and maybe learn from. These resources developed over the course of many months were published in the member-only area of our website. Were not distributed widely, and despite what some claim, were certainly not presented as curriculum to our members. Posting resources does not imply agreement with each and every document, nor would we expect that our members would look at these resources with an uncritical eye. This is what most concerns me in the attacks on the MTA. The disrespect it shows to our members, the educators that I know you respect, our highly educated teachers and other education professionals, creative individuals who have dedicated their lives to a culture of learning for young people are not robots who would somehow be brainwashed by a single set of resources. You'll hear in a moment from Ms. Anteline about her work, teaching these issues, drawing on many resources, evaluating them, considering their value, and how they fulfill the goals of her classes. For our members, the calling to nurture our young people as thoughtful, independent thinkers is a sacred one. And today, unfortunately, we live in a country where powerful government officials, led by the president, want to censor books in our libraries and classrooms, purge the government of alternate views, annex territories, promote eugenics. So I would urge the commission and the organizations represented here to truly help fight anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred and not wittingly or unwittingly reinforce the rising intolerance that is taking over this country. The authoritarian alleged ally today will, as history shows, become the enemy of Jews and marginalized groups tomorrow. And I would like us to work together to protect our schools and our students and our educators. And finally, I just want to end by saying many of you know or have on your doorpost of your house a mezuzah. But you may not know why that mezuzah is mounted in many places at an angle. According to Jewish tradition, at least the Ashkenazi Jewish tradition, this emerges from a debate between two great rabbis, Rashi and his grandson, Rabbeinu Tam, and a disagreement about that proper placement of this important object containing one of the central Jewish prayers. One believed fervently that it should be placed horizontally because the tablets of the commandments were laid horizontally in the Ark of the Covenant, and we also lay the Torah flat when we read from it. While the other believed equally fervently that it should be attached vertically to reflect that Torah stand vertically in the synagogue and that we stand when it is brought out of the Ark. According to the Ashkenazi tradition, we angle the mezuzah at 45 degrees as a compromise to recognize the force of the views held by each rabbi, but choosing to prioritize seeking peace in the name of greater truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Angeline, just one moment. We're going to pivot thank you, Mr. Page. We're going to pivot just a minute because we are quite a bit over time. So we want to hear from you, Ms. Angeline, but given how Mr. Page the subject matter of the end of his remarks, I think we're going to start with a few questions and then we're going to pivot to you, and I'm just going to try to manage our time given how many folks are here and are planning to speak. So thank you for allowing me to use that discretion. So you had mentioned a resource document, and I believe it's titled Resources on Israel in Occupied Palestine, that was generated and made available to MTA members sometime, I believe, in late 2024. Is that correct?
That's what I'm referring to, yes.
Exhibit 1, please, Kyle.
Yeah.
And in front of you, I don't think Gabe's going to hand you so that it's easier to see. And I'll give you just a second to turn it up so we can all follow along. So
I
in
do
front
hope
of-
there's time, because one of the main purposes, and we spoke before, was the idea
Yes.
that these go well together and that she's an actual teacher in a classroom teaching these subjects.
Was Ms. Angeline, did she contribute to the materials that we're
No.
looking at? Okay, thank you. So we will get to her. So in front of you and on the screen is a 9-page document with a quote from you, Mr. Page, at the top, and the MTA's logo at the end, correct?
I'm not sure what you're talking about. Yes, I see that on the first page.
That's a yes? Okay. And after the quote from you, it states, "We have compiled several resources and curricula together to help educators engage with their students on this crucial and difficult topic." Do you see that there?
Yep.
I think that was a yes. And then the resources reflect diverse positions that are meant to aid pedagogy. That's what it says, right? Okay, Kyle, can you please bring up page 8 of Exhibit 1? So we're looking now at a section of the MTA's resources, this document that is titled Visuals and Art. And below that heading, the MTA's introduction to these materials states, "Visualizing Palestine uses data and research to communicate Palestinian experiences visually." Did I get that right?
Representative, I'm not sure if are we in a court situation, or is it, I'm just wondering what.
We're talking about
Yeah.
the materials that you
Yeah,
were just
you're showing them on
referencing.
the screen, right?
Yes. You're aware that nowhere in this document, Mr. Page, is a corresponding section about Israeli or Jewish experiences.
So, I'm not going to go through each individual document, and what our board asked our professional staff to do is to prepare thoughtfully a series of resources that was done professionally, thoughtfully over many months. I have not seen one set of resources provided by the New York Times, Facing History, or any other where people didn't have concerns. Facing History, I think, was here last time.
Mr. Page, I was asking you whether you're aware
Yeah.
that none of the resources in this section involve Jewish or Israeli experiences. You're not aware of that? Okay. Kyle, can you please bring up Exhibit 2? This is a poster that states, "What was taken by force can only be returned by force." Do you see that? And it depicts a soldier wearing a keffiyeh and holding an assault weapon. My question to you is, are you aware of what data and research, that's a quote, supports the use of this material in Massachusetts classrooms?
These are resources provided for our members to think about and learn about as educators and as citizens, and they were done thoughtfully and professionally. That does not mean one agrees with each one. There are images I've seen on DESI's provided website, some of which would be traumatizing because they repeat and slanderous things about Jews during the Nazi era. But they're there to be used as documents, which I'm sure our teacher here can talk about how you use difficult, complicated documents in the classroom. These were not intended as here, use this in a classroom, and furthermore, they're out of respect for our members' ability to evaluate and decide, and also consider how you would use that, especially like in a high school class, how you would use items to actually engage in a debate over some very difficult issues.
Exhibit 3, please. How would you use this one, Mr. Page? It's a poster of Joe Biden with the word serial killer written on his forehead. Exhibit 4, please. Are you able to explain what's going on in this graphic? Ms. Antolin, are you aware of who that is at the top?
So I am not here to speak to this curriculum or set of resources at this time.
I understand, and I want to make really clear what I asked and you answered before, which is that you had nothing to do with these resources, correct?
No.
Okay. But Mr. Page was aware that we'd be discussing these resources here today. So that's George Habash. He's the leader of the, let me make sure I get this right, Marxist-Leninist Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, otherwise known as the PFLP, which was designated as a terrorist organization by the United States in 1997, 3 years before Habash's leading of that organization ended. Mr. Page, who do you suppose that person in the middle is aiming their weapon?
It's a nice try, but I'm telling you there are resources that one uses to look at an issue and look at what's out there, and our educators are capable enough to be able to evaluate and also consider what's appropriate or not appropriate, whether they even want to use it. It's as much for their edification about what's out there. Sometimes it can be you share things that are disturbing, difficult, as well as anything as something you might want to educate on. So,
Exhibit 5, please. You'd agree that this is anti-Semitic imagery, correct?
I'm not going to evaluate that.
It's a dollar bill folded up in the Star of David. Is it anti-Semitic? I think you nodded your head yes.
I know you'd like to. I understand the back and forth, which is you're trying to get away from the central point, which is that we provide imagery, we provide resources for our members to consider in their own intelligent, professional way.
And it's anti-Semitic. Can you please go to Exhibit 6? This is a poster of a Day of Rage. Are you aware that that term is used by Hamas leaders to provoke violence against Jews and Americans? I'll take that as a no. Exhibit 6A. I apologize, Ms. Andelin, but I do have to go back to you on this one. This is a photograph, this is a poster of somebody gripping the tongue of a snake. Now, Ms. Antoline, you're aware that a snake was used during Nazi Germany to symbolize Jews, correct?
Yes, but again, I'm not here to speak to this curriculum or to the images that people chose or to any of that. That's not what I'm
wanna
here
be
to
clear,
speak.
I
But
wanna
yes,
be
I'm
clear,
aware of
I'm not
that.
asking you to defend this, and I am sorry that you had to be here, honestly, because I know of your reputation, which is quite good. Exhibit 7. This one says Zionist fuck off. Did I read that correctly? What data and research, that's the quote from your documents, does the Massachusetts Teachers Association have provide supporting the use of this as an educational aid in classrooms?
These are resources to our members to consider for themselves, for their own edification, which could also be edification of things that they don't agree with and find offensive.
Exhibit 8. So I'm turning to the first item in this section of the MTA's resources, which is titled 4 Wars Old, 14 Years of Childhood in Gaza. Do you see that? I think that was a yes. And I'm now showing you one of the worksheets. It's actually the second one in this educational research. It's titled Born Unequal Abroad. And you see that this is, you have it in front of you, this is a T-chart comparing a, quote, Jewish American, and, quote, 14-year-old girl named Hannah to a, quote, Palestinian refugee, end quote, named Leela, who was born in Lebanon. That's accurate? Okay, we're all on the same page on that. And the first question relates to where these two people can visit, correct? It points out that Hannah can visit Israel and most of the West Bank, and there are programs that will fund her trip. And for Leela, it states that she cannot visit Israel, the West Bank, or Gaza. Is that what that says?
That's what I see.
Does it say anywhere on this worksheet, this educational aid, what would happen to Hannah if she visited Gaza?
This particular one does not look like it does.
What do you think would happen?
So, Rep. Cataldo, with respect, I understand what you're doing. I respect that. That's part of your job or your personal goal. This is not the Department of Education. We're not setting out a curriculum. We have curriculum standards that our members teach to. That's not the purpose. We provided resources for us, our members, to consider. And again, some have said we're trying to indoctrinate. These were behind the member wall. These were not widely distributed, as we've been able to show when we want to. For instance, in question 2 this past fall, we're able to distribute information very, very widely. This was a wish of the board to provide some information. We provided those. Not necessarily all will be agreed upon by everyone. They were not intended for everyone to read and accept every word that's there. They're rather documents to consider and evaluate.
I'm not sure what question 2 has to do with anti-Semitism in our classrooms, but we will turn to a subsequent Visualizing Palestine resource link from the MTA's list. Exhibit 10, please. This is called Watched, Israel's Elbit Systems on the U.S. Southern Border, Visualizing Palestine. This is from an organization called the Arizona Palestine Solidarity Alliance. Do you see that on the bottom?
Yep.
And as you can see, it concerns Elbit Systems, which is an Israeli company that until recently operated in Massachusetts, correct? Are you aware of that?
Nope.
According to this poster, or this educational aid, Elbit Systems makes surveillance system used on the southern border of the United States, correct?
That
That's what
seems to be what this is
teaching?
about.
And do you see where the graphic states killing migrants? 3,186 recovered remains in Arizona, 2000 to 2019. It says that, I'm reading that correctly?
Mhm.
Okay, and then there are graphics for deceased people as young as 3 years old. Can you, either of you, describe to me from this educational material how Elbit Systems is responsible for the deaths of a 3-year-old child? I'll take that as a no. Are you aware, Mr. Page, that Elbit Systems moved out of its Cambridge office in 2024, just last year, after a series of demonstrations and acts of vandalism, including one that turned violent and involved physical attacks on police officers, resulting in 9 arrests? I take it you're not aware of that. The company relocated to New Hampshire, and I take it you're also not aware that 4 young people were criminally charged and convicted in relation to their criminal trespass and criminal mischief in Elbit's new location in New Hampshire. You can understand how this type of indoctrination might lead students to take those types of actions.
And I'll
Do you
take
not?
exception with the idea of indoctrination.
looking
Indoctrination,
at
which
the
is
same
which is a
material.
very, very popular word in the Trump administration. Virtually every single secretary uses that. Suggests an organized effort to indoctrinate people. That's not what's going on. Our board asked our professional staff to provide some resources. They did, though, not saying each one is accepted by everyone, is not saying you should teach with this. It is saying here are a wide range of resources, including on topics and issues and coming from sources unlikely to be seen elsewhere, for you educators to evaluate and see if they are at all useful for your own self or as well as in your role. But this does not replace any kind of curriculum, because our members follow the state's curriculum, social studies and history curriculum.
Curriculum was your words, not mine. It's right in the document. Exhibit 11, please. Mr. Page, we're now looking at page 5 of the MTA's curriculum document. The title of this section bears the heading, quote, "Here are some articles and short videos to further deepen your knowledge of the conflict of the current war." And there are 8 materials in that, correct? You'd agree,
Yeah.
Mr. Page, that information about the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th would naturally be part of materials that would deepen a teacher's knowledge of the current war, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you're aware that there are none there?
I'm not here to speak on behalf of the MTA, but I can say that as a teacher, there are quite a lot of incredible resources out there on October 7th. I just want to make that very clear.
And thank you, Ms. Anto. I couldn't agree more, and we did have groups in that are contractors of the state at the last meeting, including Facing History, and principals and superintendents who have been working very hard to make sure that those materials are available and responsibly shared with teachers so that they can get into classrooms instead of what we're seeing now. Exhibit 12, please. I'd like to next draw your attention to page 6 of the MTA's resources, where there's a resource called Handala's Return, a children's story and workbook. And it directs you to a hyperlink for the Palestinian Feminist Collective. Do you see that?
I see it.
Okay. And unlike most other materials, this one actually provides guidance on grade level. It states, the site contains an interactive activities. This resource is most appropriate for the elementary level. Exhibit 13. If you download the workbook, you see that this first page appears to be the back of a small child and a map of Israel and the Palestinian territories with the word Palestine written on the entire map, correct?
Do you need an answer from me? Do you,
Yes,
or
I just
really?
want to make sure that you're with me. Yes.
I'm on the page you're talking about.
I'm next showing you page 3, exhibit 14, please, of the workbook, which appears to be a tracing exercise of Handala's name, correct? Would you agree that's what that is? I think that's a yes. So you'd agree that this workbook is meant for very young children, maybe kindergarten, maybe first grade? Yes. Continuing on to Exhibit 16. Handala states, quote, "When I was only 10 years old, I had to flee my home in Palestine. A group of bullies called Zionists wanted our land, so they stole it by force and hurt many people. My mama and I cried a lot. Palestinians call this experience the Nakba." Did I get that correct?
If you're reading off of this, I think you can read, and I believe that.
Exhibit 17. Turning to the next page, the child is instructed to actively participate. Zionists have never let us go back to Palestine, even though we still have the key to our home. And then at the bottom, draw a picture of your family's house and key. And I notice, Mr. Page, then it says, ask your parents for help if needed. So I take it what we're looking at is a homework assignment for this child who can probably not tie their shoes yet.
And your point is?
I'm sorry if the point's lost on you, Mr. Page. On Exhibit 19.
So if I could just interrupt for a moment, because of course I would hope that you would want to talk to a teacher at some point who is right here next to me. As I've said at the very beginning, the idea is not that everyone should agree with every single thing that is in here, nor that every educator would take this and blindly present it, as they never would. It is not the state's curriculum. It is not meant to be that. It is meant to provide a wide range, and frankly, meant to provide a wider range of resources, some of which people will find offensive, some of which I would not agree with. But they are meant to be a wide range of resources for members to consider and maybe even argue with, and even that way. So I just want to be clear. I understand the purpose of the goal you have here, but that's actually misunderstanding the mission, the goal that the board had set.
Exhibit 20. Then Handala states, children like me keep having their homes taken by Zionist bullies. Exhibit 21. And I really wish we were done with this too, but if you'll follow me to page 18. The student is instructed to take several actions to help Handala, including raising funds and chanting at protests. Are you aware of what data or research supports using this workbook in a Massachusetts classroom for kids who cannot read or write yet? I'll take that as a no. Exhibit 22. I'd like to direct your attention to the third page of the MTA's document. The title is History. And the MTA's description begins with, this section contains diverse historical perspectives, a phrase that we heard you mention a few minutes ago. Directly below that are 6 books. The first is by Norman Finkelstein. Are you familiar with that author?
Representative, you've made your point, and I realize you don't actually need me here. You should just keep making your speech, because I don't think you actually want to talk. You don't ask me questions. I understand that. So please proceed, and then I hope you'll have a chance to talk to our teacher from Lexington.
I think we're giving you a lot of opportunity to talk about the resources that you made and are proposing to put in Massachusetts classrooms in front of our children.
I actually made a presentation about a variety of things and the threats we face nationwide and the dangers of not looking at these inextricably bound issues, and I was hoping to engage in that conversation.
If you don't think that what we're looking at is dangerous, then that is a little bit problematic. I'd like to read to you what Norman Finkelstein wrote on his Substack on October 7th. On October 7th. Quote, if we honor the Jews who revolted in the Warsaw Ghetto, then moral consistency commands that we honor the heroic resistance in Gaza. I, for one, will never begrudge. On the contrary, it warms every fiber of my soul the scenes of Gaza's smiling children as their arrogant Jewish supremacist oppressors have finally been humbled. So I take it to the MTA diverse perspectives. you can correct me if I'm wrong, includes lifting up the perspectives of those who celebrate the murder and rape of Jews.
Representative, you have representative from the ADL here. The ADL defended Elon Musk using a Nazi salute. I will not go to, I would not then say,
Folks, can we please maintain decorum
I
during
would
the
not
course of this
therefore
meeting?
remove all of the work of that group. And I would also say, when you provide a document, you offer the chance of your educated professional educators to look and to evaluate, even to say, let's look at what's wrong with this, or let's look what's dangerous, or let's look what's possible here. I think that's the point, is you need to give credit to our professional educators to be able to discern.
I'm actually about to ask Ms. Antolin,
Great.
who you brought, who had nothing to do with these materials, about the next exhibit 24, please. So directly below the 6 books, there's a passage that states, here are some articles and short videos to further deepen your knowledge of the current war. Do you see that? In all of these, every one is anti-Israel, but I wanted to bring one in particular to the attention. It's the second on that list, and the title is The Balfour Declaration, Enduring Colonial Criminality. Do you see that? So just so we're clear, this is a resource that's provided on this list, Exhibit 25, please. And I'm going to read this to you. The U.S. oil money and anti-Semitism. In the same way that powerful Zionist personalities today conduct dark deals to shore up official support in contravention of international law, UN resolutions, and international public opinion, so they did a century ago. Several personalities stand out, including Chaim Weizmann, Nahum Sokolow, Louis Brandeis, and Samuel Untermeyer. These men collaborated across continents in the halls of power to influence policies and place Zionists in important posts, particularly in France and England and the United States. Weizmann recruited, you guessed it, the Rothschilds, used his charm, the promise of Jewish wartime loans, and prevailing anti-Semitic beliefs in Jewish power to seduce European statesmen to the Zionist cause. Ms. Antolin, what's that from?
So, again, I'm not here to speak on any of these. I would be happy to, at another time though, to speak to you on some of the other resources that you have pointed out that I have read and have used productively in my classrooms.
Was there one
So,
of these
but
you
that
did
would
use
not be the
productively in
time
class?
for it right now, but yes.
So
So-
which of the documents that we've seen so far have been used in a Lexington classroom?
Which of the documents?
Yes.
I'd be happy to talk about it another time.
We're right here.
Hmm.
I mean, you're a teacher at Lexington High School. And I know
Yes.
that you didn't have anything to do with this, and I think we've made that very
No.
clear. But you're telling us now that you have used one or more of the documents that I've showed.
Indeed.
Okay, and was there any
Indeed.
context in the MTA resource document that was provided about that document?
To my students or to other students at
To the
Lexington and other
teachers who were
schools?
supposed to use it?
Oh, no. It was my choice. I provided the context fully before we approached any of our resources, which is something that teachers do. And teachers absolutely teach controversial materials that they themselves do not necessarily agree with or believe in. We have methods and approaches to do that, to keep our children safe.
So
That's
you're-
all I'm going to
so
say
you're
right
aware,
now.
Ms. Antolin, that what I just read is the elders of Zion.
I'm quite aware of the document, yes, and Norman Finkelstein's work as well, yes.
And you're aware that this bears striking similarity to what teachers, can I finish
Yes.
my sentence? To what teachers during Nazi Germany were instructed to present to their students.
Yes, I teach on that as well.
Okay, exhibit 24, please. Sorry, we're going to. All right, Mr. Page, you made clear that Ms. Antolin didn't have anything to do with these resources or the curation or anything to do with this. Are you aware of who did create these materials?
I have, but I would like to have a chance to talk because you have a lot to learn from an actual educator who works diligently to teach these materials.
Could you answer my question, please?
Yeah,
Okay. And who created these materials?
our professional staff.
Okay. And who is that?
It's not your business.
Is his name Ricardo Rosa?
Our professional staff developed this with lots of input, and that's all it is.
Okay. Exhibit number 26,
and
please.
I would say, Rep. Cataldo, at the very beginning, I appreciated your words, but you actually are wanting to manipulate, influence, shape what the MTA does with in the way we work and the images, the works we provide with our own members. So I appreciate you wanting to distinguish between that, but there was no attempt to tell DESE this is what we should teach. There's no attempt to tell our members that should be what they teach. It was to provide a range of resources that our teachers, our educators professionally evaluate. So
Including
that's it.
virulently anti-Semitic material. Exhibit 26, please. This is a post by the person who was delegated this responsibility, correct?
I have no idea.
This is a post by Ricardo Rosa on October 9th, 2023. On October 9th, 2023. This was the person who was delegated to do this task, not Ms. Antolin. And that was 2 days after the largest murder of Jewish people since the Holocaust. Mr. Page, who do you think those folks are aiming their slingshots at?
I understand what you're trying to do. I will defend our professional staff, and Mr. Rosen in particular, for their professional ethics. They're allowed to have their own personal views outside the workplace. He's an outstanding member of our staff, thoughtful, spent months and months thinking about this, talking to lots of different people, and it's to me unconscionable to do what many have done as well, to try to make an open season on individuals in our staff, and I think it's reprehensible.
The end result is here for everybody to see. Who assigned that task? Did you say it was the board?
I think I'm done with this.
Okay. Does an individual named Joe Heresy serve on the board of the MTA?
Senator McCarthy, how is this any different than naming names?
That was a nice remark from my former high
Teacher,
school teacher,
yes, former high school
who was
teacher.
here, who taught Marxism, a class I appreciated in high school. Exhibit 27. This is an Instagram post by Mr. Heresy on October 8th, 2023. Has this ever been brought to your attention?
I knew this would be an inquisition. So what I'll say is this. We have a democratic body. Board members are elected. I do not tell them what to say. We do not censor them in their personal lives. We have processes for dealing with concerns that members may have with individual board members. That's our own internal business. I do not evaluate, or I do not censor. I do not get to decide what happens to an individual person. They are elected by their constituents in the MTA.
What is that?
This is a really reprehensible attack on individuals, and you can do that. You can do that in your personal time. You can do that on Facebook. You can do it wherever you want. I'm here to defend the MTA and its democratic practices and our professional staff. So if you have a problem with an individual, you should go talk to him.
I think that there are a lot of Jewish teachers who have a problem with that. Do you know what that is?
I'm not going to engage with this. A lot of people do. Yeah, I have a lot of problems with individual people as well. But on our board, the person represents their constituency on our board. What they do in their private life, I may not enjoy, I may not believe in, I may even find reprehensible. That's not the point.
So you're aware that some of the terrorists who broke into Israel on October 7th came through a border fence using a bulldozer, correct?
Indeed. You are trying to condemn our union by the actions of the individual. And I will.
Mr. Page, thank you for, I have a series of questions, and Miss Antolin, am I pronouncing that correctly, Miss? Yeah, how do you? Antolin, okay. And I promise you, we will get to you, but please engage if you have any answers for some of my questions. Mr. Page, I guess I would.
My time is limited also,
Okay.
so I'm going to have to go very soon.
Okay.
But I was hoping to stay until I could hear
Okay.
Ms. Antoletti's
All right, so
questions.
I guess an observation first. And the first thing that I would observe is that, kind of taking a 30,000-foot view, looking down, is that I've had countless conversations with members of the MTA, both Jewish members of the MTA and not. And I get a few things, right? There are some folks who just, first and foremost, they say, why are we doing this? Why are we engaging in such a highly controversial, highly complex, highly nuanced conversation? And very candidly speaking, they're scared. And they're scared that they're going to step into it and they're going to have to deal with a lot of consequences that are out there. And what I've also heard from a lot of members is, and this leads me to believe that there is this profound disconnect based on the members I have spoke to, this profound disconnect between what I would call the rank and file MTA members, right, the locals that I talk to about education matters, conditions for teachers, et cetera, all that, and what's coming out of this with this type of rhetoric, we'll call it. So I would just point that out. There's a lot of concern. There's a lot of people just saying, can't we get back to being teachers and educators? That's something I hear over and over again. And I just think that that's something that you should be made aware of. Now,
Well,
you've
can
all...
I just respond to that? Because I hear that too. Members talk to me, and that's an ongoing debate within the union. This past weekend, it was a question of what should our role be in this? Should we take position? Should we not? Whether or not even we should be involved, whatever. That's a legit debate. It happens in our spaces, our democratic spaces of our board and our annual meeting. And at different moments, our boards have taken different positions. So I hear you. That is a debate that's come with us, and I urge our own members to use their representatives, their connection to leadership, to make those cases.
And I'm quoting the resources here, the curriculum resources put out that says, the MTA believes it has a responsibility to teach their students about what's happening in the world and how to think critically about what they hear from all media sources and in society around them. Accurate statement, right? Something you believe in? So is it safe to assume over the past year, 2 years, 3 years, that as far as I can tell, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the overwhelming majority of these webinars and these conversations have been about Israel-Palestine, correct? And I'm just thinking off the top of my head. I haven't seen a webinar on Sudan, right? 61,000 people killed in the Khartoum state alone, 11 million people displaced since fighting broke out in April 2023. Syria, President Assad's actions led to the death of 500,000 Syrians, more than 7 million people internally misplaced. The Central African Republic, where 1.1 million people have been displaced since 2017, 5% of the population died in 2022 alone, a rate twice as high as any other country. Myanmar, the Congo, the fact that Chinese Uyghurs have been living indefinitely in concentration camps, Ukraine. The list goes on and on and on. But as far as I can tell, I have seen a focus, if not exclusively, but a focus that seems to be excessively focused on Israel-Palestine. Is that accurate?
I wouldn't agree with the word excessively. What I would agree with is that our members, and I think I said myself in my own comments, if you were hearing, that personally, while I understand it is for many people, frankly, even in this room, perhaps the number one issue today, it is, to my mind, not the central issue of the MTA, but our members have demanded, and our board has demanded some resources. They've also wanted, different groups have wanted to hold webinars. We've held, I think, one webinar, one workshop at a summer conference, one seminar, one webinar on anti-Semitism. There's been debate about 2 or 3 different motions. These come up organically through the organization. They're not, we don't look at it, we don't have a poor foreign policy department and decide what to talk about. This issue, for whatever reasons, has been brought up by members through their representatives.
And as far as I can tell, this issue, as far as foreign policy, this issue and this issue alone, as far as I can tell.
It is the one that has arisen. That's correct.
Okay.
And again, that's what's happened.
So, my biggest challenge and problem with these, and ma'am, I want to be very clear. I know that you have nothing to do with these. I'm talking about the MTA, the curriculum that was recommended, as far as I can tell, based on direct quotes for educators, and to then bring into classrooms. To make a decision, to your point, to make a decision, to look at some of those documents, and then make a decision, whether we want to bring it in or not, into the classroom. The problem that I have with that is that I've spent a good amount of time looking over these documents, an ungodly amount of time looking over these documents. And I'm going to be very candid here right now. If I had no interest in this region of the world and just read the 89 plus documents that have been put forth, I'll be very candid with you. I would finish that and I would say, wow, those Jewish people are tough. I would be someone who might take on an opinion that says, I can't believe this. How dare they? The point that I'm making here is that separate and distinct from the images that you put forth up there, I think that these documents, these resources, are incredibly one-sided. Now, I want to be very clear here. I think it's really, really critical. We are talking about arguably the most complex, nuanced geopolitical situation in the world. So I'm being very clear here. No one is saying don't talk about the plight of Palestinians. You're not hearing that at all. But what I am saying with absolute certainty, beyond a shadow of doubt, is I'm seeing nothing that presents the Jewish perspective or the Israeli perspective. And if I am an educator, and again, I now have an interest in this, but if I am an educator who, and ma'am, please take this very respectfully, I've read your background. I think that your background on this, some of the organizations you've been in, I would venture to say, is probably a little bit more advanced than some others in terms of this subject matter. So now here I am as an educator, and I've got these documents presented to me that talks only about the Nakba, that talks only about instances of, occupation and settlements and pushing people off and genocide and apartheid and an ethnic cleansing. Again, I would have that mindset of, yeah, I think I would take an anti-Jewish perspective. So here is my issue, and then I'll let you talk, ma'am. Refined to its most barest essence, in academia, and in fact, in much of your rhetoric, I heard over and over again, diversity, diversity. In fact, the curriculum resources themselves say diversity of views. These views are not diverse. These views are woefully incomplete and contain one side, again, of the most intense, nuanced, complex there is. I would suggest to you that that's not education. I would suggest to you that that is a recommendation of education malpractice. One side. One side.
She would like to.
But please, by all means.
I would like to make my statement because it does concern exactly what you're saying. But with respect, Senator, there is no such thing as a comprehensive curriculum on anything. There is no single source. And it is not the prerogative of this organization to make a source for everything. I just want to point that out there. And I spoke to so many history teachers about this, about coming here. And again, with respect, they sort of smiled a little bit when they heard something like what you're saying, because they would never, ever come in and look at this source and say, that is comprehensive, that's what I'm going to present. They would never say, I shouldn't look for other materials when, like I said before, materials on, for example, October 7th have been published and are excellent and are used by teachers. So I just don't want this conversation to take a turn of not understanding how teachers approach sources. They don't approach them how you're describing.
Okay, so
right. So I just wanted to make that clear before I make my statement.
I appreciate that.
They don't.
But what I would say is that this is, and I think the quote was, the largest teachers union in New England, correct? My response to that would be, absolutely. I know there are any number of resources in October 7th in B-Hub. That is why I know that this material is so one-sided. And ma'am, respectfully speaking, what I would say to you is that for a teacher who has no background in this subject matter to look at this, they could be forgiven for not thinking to themselves, this is the entirety of the story. So yes, you are right. These are
Well,
the...
I'm not sure they would be forgiven for that.
Okay,
That's
so-
not the way we approach things
Okay,
as educators.
so here's my ask then. My hope is that someone from the MTA, and again, I don't think anyone, if someone is being objective, if someone is being impartial, and I have to believe that I am here, if someone reads these documents, I don't understand how you can say that this presents both sides of an argument. And my point would be, ma'am, to what you just said, there are any number of materials, but there are not any number of materials being recommended by the MTA. And that is a distinction with a profound difference.
I'll address that in my statement.
And I'm hoping one thing you could do. So can I have the quotes, please? And I promise, because I want to be mindful of what you just said as well, also about having to leave, and then the inquiry. So from one of the resources, what is Israel, what is Palestine, and what is the Nakba? In 1948, British and Jewish Europeans fought a war against the indigenous Palestinian population in surrounding Arab countries. They drove Palestinians out of their villages, killing many, took their homes and lands. The Palestinians who survived became refugees and have never been allowed to go home since then. That event is called the Nakba, meaning catastrophe. So I guess what I would say is this, and this is where I'd be interested in your perspective, and then you can talk. So as far as I can tell, and you please correct me if I'm wrong, is that going back to, not to bring geopolitics too much into this, but completely bereft from any of that is any mention of, say, something along the lines of that when the UN partitioned the land we know as Palestine, right? There was a recommendation that there be a Jewish state as well as an Arab state. And my understanding, and you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, is that the Jewish population said yes, the Arab population said no, and a war ensued, correct?
That's a simplistic version of.
Please, by all means, correct me.
I don't think I have time to do that right now. But this is, you're reading a perspective, right? Whether we like it, agree with it, disagree with it, it is a perspective, and I am not here, no matter how much I may disagree with them myself, to censor those. Children need to see how people think and feel. We talk about how we approach that and how carefully we approach different opinions that are wildly different and frighteningly different and dangerously different from one another. But there has to be ways in education to do that, or we all wouldn't be here, right? We wouldn't be here. So again, this is in my statement.
Just before you do that, ma'am, just to be clear, I agree wholeheartedly with you that there needs to be diversity of views and that students need to be exposed to things even if they find them difficult in instances. My point here is that these documents being recommended by the MTA do not have that diversity of opinion. If you were to say diversity of opinion is important, then have diversity of opinion. That doesn't exist here. That's my point, please.
I'm not here to defend
Please,
the
by all
MTA.
means. The floor is yours, ma'am.
That's not my job.
The floor is yours.
So I'm going to try and read my statement, which does address some of the things that you said. So I just wanted to wish everybody a good afternoon again. My name is Jessica Anteline. I'm a social studies teacher at Lexington High School. I've been a teacher for 9 years, and I'm here to share my experiences about teaching about anti-Semitism and the ongoing war since the October 7th attacks. I am not, as I said before, here to speak on behalf of the MTA, nor am I here to speak for any organization about how to educate students on the ongoing Palestinian-Israeli conflict or on the Israeli-Hamas war. Nor am I speaking on behalf of all history teachers. I am in awe of their creativity and knowledge, right? And I have a supportive department that encouraged me to come today. I actually see a Lexington resident here. I know how rare that is, given how many teachers are exposed to and unprotected from the barrage of media and politics that rage against our work. My academic background is in religion, archaeology, history, and museums. That isn't unique. I am an educator at the intersection of history and memory. That isn't unique. But I am rare in that I was given the chance to teach exactly in my field of study at Lexington when I was hired. I teach modern world history and the only course available at our school about modern genocides. I am also an instructor for Seton Hill University, where I teach educators how they can create sustainable and accessible courses on anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. I say all this not to prove myself an expert, by no means. I say it with the hope that you can recognize that I care about the wave of anger and the accusations that erupted here in Massachusetts because of the October 7th attacks and their aftermath. History teaching is political, moral, personal, and emotional. We are misled if we think we teach children just how to think or to just become critical thinkers. That is an impossible job that we barely get to touch the surface of at the high school level. We are misled if we think that we always have to teach both sides of a history. Rarely are there only two sides. We are misled if we think teachers pull material from a single curriculum guide or depend upon a single organization to support our teaching. That would go against everything we know about the challenges of constructing historical narratives, especially at the K through 12 level when students lack significant historical background knowledge and the amount they read outside of school is far less than in previous years. What we need to know is that teachers teach because we care about history and are inspired by human change and interaction. But we are often assigned classes with content that is entirely foreign to us, and this speaks to what you were saying, Senator, often late in the school year. We are expected to teach such classes to impressionable young adults just a few months or weeks after we are given an assignment. Do you know how much dedication a teacher must have to learn historical material this quickly, let alone have the confidence to teach it? Again, I'm here not because that's not been my case. I was assigned classes at Lexington that focused on all of my content and strengths. But the reality of our job, one that is underpaid and given impossible demands, is that this is not the case for most educators, which makes us vulnerable and doubtful of our skills and knowledge, opening us up to making grievous mistakes. Of course, sometimes we relish the challenge of something brand new, but even that comes with massive stressors. Just ask my colleagues teaching economics this year. I've never actually met a confident history teacher. I've met compassionate and kind ones that make me so proud of their creativity and dedication, but not fully confident ones. Perhaps I'm projecting, but what I noticed for the last 9 years is that history teachers are regularly talking about what we don't know, what we wish we knew, and that we constantly doubt our knowledge because we are at the centers of angry and dangerous debates. It is a burden you do not have unless you have been or are an educator. The uncertainty, the scramble, the expectation to teach current events, and the realization that your own students are part of the violent narratives you are helping students process in your classrooms. It is all overwhelming. Given these burdens, what can happen? When the news of October 7th reached the United States, I started to get text messages, phone calls, and emails from fellow teachers all around the United States and abroad, wondering that if they addressed the violence of that day, the horror of that day, and the war that followed, would they be in trouble? Are they teaching the right maps, the most reliable accounts? Would they be called anti-Semitic or Islamophobic for trying to talk about why people desire to live in the lands of their ancestors with equity and stability? Would they end up on the news or plastered around social media? Would their students hate them? Because that's what we do to educators. often without recognizing their struggles. President Trump doesn't even seem to support our growth and development, which is a long and arduous process. So how do we cope with all of this? How do we help our students cope? One reality is that we may default to a curriculum or lesson from a trusted colleague, or use ones we hear are good, or seem easy to teach, or that the school adapted. I see educators do this all the time, and I see the regret that often comes with it. And when it comes to teaching anti-Semitism using already constructed lessons, or indeed any sensitive subject like this, the organizations with the strongest voices, the ones with the most widely distributed and well-funded curriculum, do not, and frankly should not, teach students just how to think. They have agendas, moral stances, and goals. They aren't neutral, and they do not exist for educators to just teach critical thinking. The Shoah Foundation has an agenda. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum has one. The ADL has one. Facing History has one. I could go on and on. They aren't neutral. And that's their prerogative. They are nonprofits. They are educational and cultural organizations with passionate missions, and they have the right to exist and to struggle to achieve their goals. They fight for what they think is correct. Such battles exist in all subjects. We are part of these battles and not separate from them. And so teachers can, willfully or unknowingly, not just push the agendas of their public schools or of the Massachusetts social studies curriculum standards, but also of the organizations that provide the materials they may feel the need to depend upon for support in their difficult jobs. And we know there are gaps, some intentional, some unintentional, in what is out there for teachers to rely upon and potentially use as part of curriculum on anti-Semitism, the history of Israel and Palestine, and the war, but we can end up using those materials anyway. Often it is not until several years into a course that a teacher feels strong enough to pull significant amounts of their own sources with confidence and use the skills of a historian to evaluate those sources. But we are not really given the time to do these things, even though we have the skills to do so. And those strong, experienced teachers corroborating documents also have to make arguably insane decisions, going against all they know about how to approach the construction of historical narratives. Often after all of their work and research, they end up choosing perhaps 5 documents to represent an entire series of events, beliefs, decisions, because that's what most kids can handle and succeed with in the time that a teacher has to teach. Within that critical choice lies all that a history teacher is: their perspectives, their politics, their experiences or lack thereof, and their love of learning. But whether a teacher pulls from organizational curricula or pulls the historical documents themselves, much of what exists or is created is simplified or becomes purely document-based, such as having students examine the founding documents of Israel and Arab nationalism, but not the sadness, violence, and anger that comes with it. History doesn't work that way. We saw that with the MTA. There were teachers who were genuinely interested in understanding anti-Palestinian racism and moving beyond what is out there for teachers to access, moving beyond the neutrality and safety of particular documents. There were Jewish teachers who wanted to teach in new ways and dig into what people are experiencing today and the viewpoints of key stakeholders. But that takes intensive reflection, time, resources, and money, and we seem to want to act fast. And so our fears sanitize learning opportunities, our media anxiety accelerates our own anxiety, and our education system has doubtfulness built into it that reduces our ability to make informed decisions in time for our students to have interactive learning. So it seems that the situation we have created for ourselves is that we continue to struggle to give teachers what they need to teach about conflict now. For example, how does a teacher approach the murderous rampage unleashed on October 7th that is now available to view all over the internet? How do we approach a headline that says Knesset bill offers cash to Gazans willing to relocate? We know the dangers of conflating people with their governments, but they're intertwined in a complex cultural web. Of course, children are going to ask about what leaders and media figures say and how representative their words are of general thinking. Educators of all kinds are exposed They're vulnerable and doubtful, but we're also stunning in our resilience, and so are students. We walk down a common path. Students do want to know the perspective of their teachers. They know that teachers set examples and that great teachers don't ask you to be like them or think like them. They ask you to consider what they have for you in each lesson they present. The greatest educators I have seen in my life are honest with their students about their own perspectives before they attempt to teach a controversial subject, not after, not never. There is no such thing as presenting history neutrally. It does not exist, and we are misled if we think teaching is or should be neutral. I would not want a neutral teacher. I want one that cares so much about their topic that they help students through the history and say, here's my conclusion. Here's how I got to it. What's yours? Tell me what your perspective is and what can you find out about this subject. Sometimes a value-neutral position is unacceptable. Interactive objectivity is necessary in learning. Perhaps we fear that if we presented students the horrors and origins of October 7th, the hopeful and angry history of the establishment of Israel, the strategic choices of imperial powers that led to the creation of the objective documents they see in their lessons, the violence that removed and continues to remove Palestinians from their homes, the everyday sadness, frustration, and sense of despair in their lives and the lives of those who live in this chaos, the racism that is reported all over the media, that students would have no answers and no conclusions. Instead, they would confront a stunning array of contradictory accounts, vast imbalances of power, racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, nationalism, and inequity. The parents, communities, and organizations that provide or support certain curriculum may also find students contradicting their organizational or cultural goals. The path to critical thinking can be painful, and it is often lonely. It is one that we cannot always control, no matter how much we wish to. Historical analysis topples governments. It causes organizations to revive their mission statements. It changes children and moves them in and out of cultural circles, including their own family and friends. And so I want to leave you with a quotation from the film The U.S. and the Holocaust, which was not a neutral film by any means. And yet I imagine most people in this room would be perfectly fine with it being shown in classrooms, myself included. I want to leave you with the words of an educator and historian featured in the film, whom I admire very much, Dr. Rebecca Erbelding. She's at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. The Holocaust disrupts any idea that we have of good and evil, of right and wrong. This is a story in which everyone is challenged all the time. We are challenged as Americans. We're challenged as parents, as children. We're challenged as neighbors and as friends to think about what we would have done, what we could have done, what we should have done. And even though the Holocaust physically took place in Europe, it is a story that Americans have to reckon with too. I think the same is true about what happened on October 7th, what is happening in Gaza, and what is to come during this presidential administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Antoline, and I really appreciate your time. I know that it's hard to come here and speak, especially on these issues. I want to just reiterate that you had nothing to do with what was created. You came here as an expert, somebody who is highly respected in teaching on these issues that we're here talking about today. I also just want to, before turning it back to the commissioners, I just want to publicly thank all of the Jewish teachers who have reached out to us, terrified and dismayed about the materials that we saw today, and who had the courage to make an effort to have them formally taken down off the website and removed or limited to make sure that there was not virulently anti-Semitic material that was shared to teachers without the type of context that an expert like Ms. Antoline has. And I want to just say that I understand that they were gaslit and criticized, and how scary that is to have the courage to stand up and say, this is wrong, to say what everybody can see is wrong and anti-Semitic, and be accused of being right-wing or anti-LGBTQ or McCarthyist, simply because you want to make sure that our children are protected and we don't have anti-Semitic teaching material in our classroom without any context. So I want to thank those teachers who are courageous, and I understand that it is scary to stand up in a group of people who say things that are harmful.
Just to be clear, Mr. Chairman, before we open it up, you know, you mentioned at the beginning of your remarks about Jewish teachers and Jewish educators. I just want the record to reflect that I have heard from many non-Jewish teachers and educators who have raised concerns about these issues as well. Members of the commission, questions?
Commissioner Kibnis, thank you so much.
So not a question, but just a couple things. So you mentioned you have a museum, your background in museum studies as well. You can't hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
I do.
can talk louder.
no, I can.
No, they can't hear me in the back. So you mentioned you have a background in museum studies as well. So one of the things as I'm building a museum here in Boston is, you know, I've learned, and not just in the Holocaust world, but in the museum world, right? Museums are based on facts. Math is based on facts. Science is based on facts. And here you're saying that teaching history is personal, but history should be taught based on facts. Because, as you said, you're imposing it on impressionable students. They're impressionable. So your personal opinions, I feel, of any teacher should be left out of the classroom. And I think students should be presented with facts and evidence. Also, I disagree with you. Critical thinking is not hard to teach. You see it in the Science Museum here. You see it in the aquarium. You see it being taught in the Children's Museum. You know, it is a complex skill, but I would think teachers are taught that skill when they're going through their teaching. So that's really, you know, I think there's a way to teach it, so.
Yes,
Commissioner Likens?
may I reply to that?
Of course.
Please.
Go ahead, Ms.
Holocaust museums run, right, a very careful line between history and memory. Both matter, right? We teach and learn and hear about both. It is not just pure facts. That's not the way we approach museums. That's not the way we approach historical accounts. We recognize that there are, right, human emotions involved in those things. So, yes, with respect, I do disagree with that, yes.
Mr. Likens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Page, thank you for coming in today. You know, I listened to your opening comments and found that there was a lot more you said that I agreed with and was comfortable with. Thank you for the work that you do. That said, I'm also a child of survivors. And one of the things that I've taken away from that experience is that ideas matter. Ideas travel. Ideas quickly shape the world that people live in and how they think. And so it's in that context that I look at the curriculum resources that were created by the MTA. And frankly, I understand the democratic processes that happen, but democracy isn't a cure against bigotry. If the MTA is creating certain resources, then the fact that they're created democratically does not cure that. But I think the real point that I want to talk with you about is that there's nothing wrong with the MTA producing content that's critical of Israel or critical of Jews. What screams in the resources we've seen is that there is nothing that presents a different narrative. I've gone through those curriculum resources, gone through them carefully. It's a mono-narrative that conveys, it is extreme one-sided narrative, that conveys, paints almost a demonic picture of Israel. And I am concerned about the impact that it has, whether or not it was a result of democratic processes. So I have a few questions that I'd like to ask. First, do you believe that it is acceptable for K through 12 educators to use their position in the classroom to promote their political beliefs and ignore or denigrate other points of view?
No, and that's not what I've said, and that's not what our teacher here said. And correct. And I mean, Shalike and I appreciate your words, but I mean, you and your organization have led a campaign which has resulted in a lot of attacks and threats, and which is frankly deeply misleading and has been hurtful both to the organization and our individual members and our staff, and labeling an entire that the union is indoctrinating its members is simply false, and I think you know that. And so it's been disturbing. So the short answer to that is no, but the larger answer is I've sort of had it with the kind of misleading efforts of your organization. And it's disturbing to have them here.
If there's anything in the documents we prepared that is not true, please let me know. We'll correct it.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. Let me skip over a couple of things. On December 5th, you did come out with the curriculum resources. There were 89 listed in total, and we went over those a little bit, but I'd like to add just a different flourish to that. More than 60 of them, according to my count, were dedicated to advancing a narrative that subjected Israel to withering criticism without any context that might provide greater context or suggest there might be an alternative way of looking at the conflict. There were no resources dedicated to just providing an Israeli perspective on the conflict, except for two resources. One was a history written by Anita Shapira, and one was a definition that came from the ADL. There were some resources that were just that provided a balance, tried to show pedagogies for presenting, modeling how to show balanced views. There was also some resources about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. But overwhelmingly, I think one of the things that's so unnerving is the photos you saw really displayed the spirit of what was shown in those curriculum resources. From a pedagogical point of view, I listened very carefully to what was being said. How can that be the right way to present resources? How can that be helpful to teachers who are doing it? I don't see that. I don't understand. I understand that people have political preferences. I don't understand that that is a pedagogical device that in any way advances learning, openness, different points of view, civility between people.
So as you said, they came out in December. Therefore, our members, so with respect, I'm going to listen to my members, and they have a lot of opinions about this. We had discussion at our board meeting. And so, and as you see at the very top of that, it says we will consider, thinking about additions, changes to this, and that's an ongoing process, no doubt. And so as our members weigh in, we will look at them and consider how we present them.
Members are not any group of people. Your members are teachers. Your members, and the December 9th resolution that passed it said specifically, these are for teachers to bring back to their students. I don't understand the pedagogical exercise that's going on here, and I think it would be helpful to expect. The fact that your teachers want that says something about your teachers and the community here, what's going on. It's very worrisome. But we're talking about the MTA providing this for teachers.
Commissioner Fuller.
We're really going to have to leave by 3.
Can I make it fast? Just a quick question for you, Mr. Page.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I just want to make sure that somebody turns off their phone. Thank you.
All right. I do appreciate that you have to go, and we've kept you a long time. And then I do have a question for you and a comment as well, but for Mr. Page, the teacher sitting next to you said teachers don't have enough time to prepare, so that they often default to a trusted source, and that teachers are not neutral. They take moral stances. I'm deeply concerned that many of the materials, if not the vast majority, had only one point of view. They were not well-rounded, and you didn't point teachers to those other diverse point of views. Can you talk a little bit whether you feel comfortable that it was largely a point of view? And the second one is on December 9th in 2023, the board, and I understand it's a democracy, put forward a statement urging that President Biden be pressured to stop funding and sending weapons in support of the Netanyahu government's genocidal war on the Palestinian people. Within hours, the Newton Teachers Association, an important unit of the MTA, responded by saying the NTA unequivocally disassociates itself from this statement, the MTA statement, and in particular from its anti-Semitic dog whistling. The statement fails completely to hold in mind the atrocities against Israelis on October 7th. And it goes on. Talk about whether you need, if you're going to provide materials to your teachers, do they need to be well-rounded, vetted, and put into context, and whether you have any thoughts about whether the MTA's December 9th statement was anti-Semitic dog whistling as one of your key
So I'm sorry I'm
associations
smiling,
said.
but it is funny, Mayor Fuller, if you mind, that for you to be citing the NTA, the Newton Teachers Association, where you were in a pitched battle with a few
actually,
years
can
ago.
I just
So-
say, the NTA, I support our teachers. Sometimes I don't always
I understand.
agree with
I'm just
some
saying-
of the union
wanted to
leadership.
explain the smile
Our
on my face.
teachers in Newton are fabulous.
I agree with that. I have previously said that I think the wording, and I think many members in retrospect would not have liked that wording. The call was simply to call for a further ceasefire. We had done that as an executive committee. That was controversial at the time, even though then later even critics said, like, actually that statement was pretty reasonable, looked at both sides, looked at the horrors of October 7th and after. So I think many people, I will just say personally, but there are others who felt like, no, those words need to be in there. Again, I preside over the board. I'm the president of the organization. I do not determine every word that gets voted on by the board. And then, as I said earlier, I mean, I feel like I've said it many times, the resources developed. There's also a statement on there that now that they're been out to our members as resources, no doubt that we will look at them, we'll look at additions, subtractions, further context, whatever. That's an ongoing process.
Have you added any materials to
Not since December 5th when they first came out.
And to be clear, 2 days ago, Jewish and non-Jewish teachers put up a request to have some of those materials that are anti-Semitic taken down, and they were called right-wing, similar to what's happened today. They were accused of trying to censor material. Is that right?
Representative, you dangerously used, like, vaguely, they were by as passive voice. I don't know who you're talking about. I didn't call them that. We actually debated it at the board. It was discussed. It was debated. The board chose not to take them down. And even though there was good debate back and forth, there was different amendments, it didn't happen. So you can read from what you will, but I didn't hear that in there. That was a reasoned debate, again, with our board.
Mr. Page, is it not true that there were Jewish teachers who stood up and had the courage to stand up and propose that some, not all, some of the materials that were objectionable were taken down. And in response, during that debate that you just cited, they were called right-wing and other criticisms.
I'm not going to get into the debates about our board meeting. I could tell you what that result, I could say what happened, but I'm not going to get into the debate about what individuals said.
Their attempt, the result was that their attempt to do that was denied, correct? Commissioner Frieden.
Mr. Page, it's good to see you again. Nice to meet you, Ms. Anteline. I know that you say you're stressed for time. I hope that you'll stay. I have a few questions, but if you have somewhere else that's more important, I understand. I do have one question for you if you really need to go. But Ms. Anteline, I'd like to ask you some questions about these topics to just have a discussion, please. So my question for you, Mr. Page, is, and by the way, I'm just a sports lawyer, but my dad was a member of a public college teachers union for decades, and so I appreciate the importance of teachers unions and what you do and how hard teachers work. And my question, I'm just struggling to understand the MTA's process and standards when the board thinks about sponsoring programs and materials. And, do board members decide these things just on their personal politics? When it involves materials that are offensive to a vulnerable minority, whoever that minority is, are the board supposed to take into account the rights and interests of the minority group, or can they pay no heed to them? And would they treat other vulnerable minorities the same way that we've seen Jewish teachers treated? And for instance, hypothetically, what if you had a request by some MTA rank and file members who said, we'd like to sponsor an anti-gay program and talk about that certain LGBTQ groups aren't legitimate and don't really exist? Would the MTA consider sponsoring that kind of program? How do you think about these things?
So this very briefly,
Mr. Page, I just want to make sure that we can get that turned off. Okay, thank you.
So, look, we of course have standards. It's a democratic organization, which means it's all messy. Means we don't start the year and say this is the exact thing. We know exactly what we're going to do. Part of it is then people bring before proposals, and then other people organize and say, can we do something on this? That's the beauty, partly, and the messiness of our organization. But we absolutely do have values, and we consider those. And there are times in which people say, well, that's actually, you've gone way over the line. And I understand that clearly that's some people feel that way. And then others say, no, let's keep that wide net of what's possible to discuss. And therein lies the debates that we've had with our board, with our organization. I know that's a vague answer, but that's how it works. And so we do our very best, and with our outstanding professional staff, to present programs that are useful to our members, the vast majority which are about pedagogy, they're about union organizing, they're about being better union activists, and the like.
Do you have time for one more before I turn to Ms. Angeline? Thank you. So I have a question about Israeli Americans. It's estimated there are about 30,000 Israeli Americans in Massachusetts, including students and teachers in our public schools. And these are immigrants in our community. They have deep personal ties to Israel. They have personal friends and family who've been devastated since October 7th. And I guess my question is, and this refers to some of the concerns you've heard up here about balance, can you see a danger that when the state's largest teachers union engages what seems like kind of a non-stop attack on Israel for over a year, when the union debates over 6 resolutions about Israel, and then it promotes some of the violent imagery that you've seen here, and it sponsors webinars, and we'll talk for a few minutes after this about webinars. Can you see a danger that this could translate into harassment and bullying and discrimination against Israeli American children and families here in Massachusetts?
I can always see danger around this issue. Absolutely. With respect, Mr. Friedman, I do take exception to the idea that there's sort of been this anti-Israeli campaign. There was a call for ceasefire twice. You could argue how it was rephrased, but that was the goal. I know that was the goal among our executive committee and our board. There was one webinar on anti-Palestinian racism. There was a webinar on anti-Semitism in the United States. So there's no organized campaign at all. I just don't think that's right. And I happen to have a cousin who teaches in education in Massachusetts who's Israeli-born and an Israeli citizen. So I know of those concerns. Certainly, and there's people on all sides who feel at each point concerned, and that's difficult for me. And I get it from all sides. I get it from Jewish members who are upset. I get it from non-Jewish members or members who may be Jewish who are very concerned about what's going on in Gaza and the violence there. So we're getting it from all sides. So the simple answer is, of course, I'm concerned what each thing can lead to, but we try to be as open and respectful. And the main thing we do is try to lift up the protection of our own members for their ability to teach their students, for the students to learn, and to prevent attacks that I'm seeing from without. And I just don't want that to be happening within Massachusetts as well.
My hope is that you'll join us and lean into efforts to make sure that we're promoting enough of a voice for Israeli Americans. So I do have several questions. I know we're short on time about a webinar that you mentioned, and I applaud you for doing the anti-Semitism webinar that was done in June. But I do want to ask a few questions about the webinar that was held in March. And Ms. Antoline, if you are willing to look at these materials, if you have to run, whoever's able to answer, I think it's helpful to just have a discussion about this. So on March 21st last year, there was a webinar held by the MTA called The Struggle Against Anti-Palestinian Racism. So if we could show Exhibit DF1, please. Ms. Antoline, I assume you weren't involved in any of this webinar's construction or stuff?
No.
Did you attend the webinar by any chance?
No.
Okay.
That's
and
not
I'm not
what I'm
asking you to criticize, but I just am trying to get some context from either of you on this. So this is a slide in the March 21st webinar that says, the text says, Zionism equals settler colonialism in Palestine. And I have a couple historical questions for you, Ms. Antoline. Since the founding of the Zionist movement in 1897, Zionism has meant support for the existence of a Jewish state in the area that's now Israel, right?
So, again, I think that's quite simplified. Did you want to say something?
No, you should just follow it up.
Yeah. Again, I think that's simplified. All I'm going to say is that from my historical perspective, the Zionist movement is more complicated than that, right? And so I'm not sure what you're asking here.
Okay. I mean, I guess.
If I could just, actually, I think you have speakers involved in this webinar coming up, so you can ask them those questions. I referred vaguely to this in my comments. I attended and I defended the rights for us to, as I say, I take a wide berth. I teach at UMass Amherst, by the way. I'm actually a historian. I have a PhD in history, so I understand the approaches to history. And also I take a very wide berth in wanting to hear lots of different viewpoints and opinions and documents, as troubling as they might be, or as ones that I agree with as they be. And so as I described in here, some of the stuff I just thought was not very good. Some of it was really interesting, even if I disagree with it. Some of it I found kind of offensive. Some of it was really enlightening. There's a lot of different feelings in that. And so that's the way I looked at it, is that as when I'm at UMass and some speaker comes in, I'm like, oh my God, that was terrible. Or that was really enlightening and I still disagree. There's a wide range of views on it. And so I think you should, if you want to ask specific questions, you should ask the people who presented it. But we held that as a way of offering space for a viewpoint there's viewpoints that aren't always heard.
Well, my specific question was, what is Zionism? And your anti-Semitism webinar in June said Zionism is a political movement to establish a Jewish homeland. So I don't think it's as complicated necessarily. Is it accurate to say that Jews lived in the land that is now Israel for thousands of years?
Yes, but again, I'm not sure why.
Well, I'll tell you why I'm asking.
We're being asked that.
Bear with me. And is it fair to say that the UN in 1947 voted to establish both a nation of Israel and a separate nation of Palestine, and that was just 2 years after the Holocaust ended? Is that true or more complicated?
The UN resolution?
In 1947, it was 2 years after the Holocaust?
Yes.
Is it safe to say that the UN established Israel to provide a safe haven for millions of Jewish refugees after 6 million Jews were slaughtered in the Holocaust and millions more were displaced?
Again, I'm not sure what you're you're
But is
getting
that-
at,
is it-
because
is that
that's
the
one
basis of-
reason. Again, I'm
Okay.
I'm not here to go through that with you, but it is complicated, the choices behind the establishment of that state. That's what I was referring to in my piece, is that when we give children just neutral documents and not the conversations and not understandings of what goes on behind the scenes, which we may not like, we do them a disservice.
So it's
again,
complicated. When you
you're
say that the
referring
state-
to official documents, not the nuances behind it all.
Okay, I'm sorry. but-
Commissioner, I know that Mr. Page has to leave. There's one more question from another commissioner, Commissioner Shakur.
Thank you, and I have no exhibits, and I really just have a point of clarification or wanting to make sure I understood something that you said about the reason why the resources look the way they did, which has struck many of us as imbalanced, but you've presented a different view that I've been turning over in my head, and I want to understand if I want to make sure I'm understanding it right, which is they are canted so heavily into something beyond the horrors of the day of October 7th because the membership felt that there was a dearth of information on that for their teaching. Is that why, the at least first version of this resource list is that way, or did I misunderstand?
No, and I'm not speaking on behalf of them as to why they created it. I was not part of that. No, but what I was saying is that in speaking to teachers, and also I'm here to speak for myself, we never saw whatever was going on with the MTA as something singular, as the only thing, as somehow put on a pedestal. We are aware of at Lexington. Thankfully, we are quite resourced in our town. We have facing history representatives. I have children who are in that organization in my class. We are quite aware that when we went to review it all, when we went looking for helpful resources, we noticed that. And some teachers said, well, what about other materials, right? So what I'm trying to get out is that we try, when we are able, even though we don't get enough time to do what we should be allowed to do, we pull from many sources. And that's all I was saying. And that the idea of saying an organization, I'm going to only believe in that, and they're the right one, and we're just going to use those, is not how we operate. And including with the ADL resources, I know your resources on the foundation and establishment of Israel, modern Israel, very well. And, I give them to my students alongside many others. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that is
Thank
helpful.
you.
I think the follow-up to it, though, is just that in the creation of that resource list, I will just state that we have heard that teachers who wanted to contribute additional information from a Jewish or Zionist perspective, that information wasn't welcomed in that process. I don't want to debate that with you, but I want to put out there that is something that is of concern, and that if, as a membership organization, if that is something you take back to make sure that the processes are inclusive enough, then as the resources are updated, that will be an important
Yes,
improvement.
thank you. Yeah, my members have been in touch, and I'm meeting with them.
Commissioner
Thank you.
Hay.
Thank you. I just very quickly, I want to just first of all say thank you to Ms. Antolini, and I will say that you are actually one of our local treasures. I know I have heard from many. My daughter actually graduated Lexington High School just before you started, unfortunately, but she is now also teaching in public schools. But I guess my takeaway from this conversation, in addition to wanting to thank you, I listened very carefully to what you said, and I think that there's an important piece here. When you come into this course with so much background and knowledge, and you are able, as you said, to use these resources in a very constructive manner. That is because you bring with you sort of the other side, the other resources, like the Holocaust Memorial movie that you cited. And where I'm left uncomfortable is for people who are less well-resourced as they come into this. This is a list which, admittedly, as people are very stressed and time shortened, the MTA is a trusted resource. And so that's where I think the greatest level of discomfort sits, certainly for me, as I look at this list, that it does not provide both sides and someone needs to go outside for the other context and the other argument. Am I getting that right?
I hear. Should I reply? Time? So I absolutely hear what you're saying. That is actually why I made mention of that in my statement, because it's a huge concern for those of us who are more senior to help our teachers who are new. And so we have protections for that in place that we try very hard to keep in place. One is that we have professional learning communities that no teacher is left on their own to have something like that happen, right? We also know that when we hire teachers, they come in having gone through programs that teach them not to rely on a single set of resources. They are trained that way. So while mistakes, and as I said, absolutely happen, it is more likely they make a mistake because our system is not giving them the time than their own, right, training. I have yet to see in my 9 years, in all the teachers I worked with them ever do something like that. But again, of course those things can happen, and we do try to put protections into place. And we also create constant, ongoing, developing lists of resources, just shared Google Docs, full of thousands of them to help teachers learn. And that's why we also participate in professional development. All of those things happen. So I hope that reassures you there are many, many safeguards in place to prevent that from happening, just like in any professional community, scientific, historical, otherwise.
And is that Lexington you're speaking about, or is that the MTA who provides all of those safeguards?
Oh no, those are within schools. We have them in Lexington, and they're standard fare across school systems. I know people can speak to Newton. Professional learning communities, the support of our new teachers, that's standard within the school system. We do it without being paid for it. We do it because we know these sorts of things can happen, and we don't want our teachers to be vulnerable.
So sorry, were you done, Commissioner? So just in parting and saying goodbye, I would just say this. The challenge with that, and I really appreciate this back and forth, is that when that list of resources, if you will, comes with the imprimatur of the MTA, there is a thought process, good, bad, or indifferent, and it might not be accurate, that these are the resources that we should be going over. And although that there are other resources, you've already pointed that out. If there is a document that says, these are our recommended resource, and just to be very clear, not good just to present neutral. I agree with you 100%. The concern that I am raising, and I think many fellow commissioners remember, is that this isn't about neutral versus non-neutral. This is about a perspective being given and then another perspective not being given. And the concern is that, maybe educators in other districts might not, without that background that you so aptly have demonstrated today that you have, might allow this to be the document. However, I'd like to end on a silver lining. We would love to continue this dialogue. And if there is a way that we could, upon your further going back, introspection, whatever you want to call it, if in fact you were so inclined to take a look at that, you've already referenced the fact that we would be willing to engage and update these resources. We would love to continue that dialogue if that's something that you'd be willing to do. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and you have a nice day. Appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Folks want to take a 5 to 7 minute break, stretch a little bit. We'll be back here in 7 minutes.
Sure, yep. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for quieting down so quickly. So I suppose we are a little bit on a different track than I said we would be on when we started out. So we did obviously just take a break. I think that we will, and we do have a very hard stop. So we're going to go a little bit more efficiently through the rest of our meeting. Thank you very much, Professor Auerbach, from UMass Boston, Emerita, and Jewish Voice for Peace, Amelia Diamond, LSCW educator, board member, Boston Workers Circle, Mary Najimy, elementary STEM lab teacher in Concord, Sana Fidel, from SAWA, Newton Area Alliance for Peace and Justice, and public school parent. Did I get that right? All right, well, thank you so much for coming in. As I said, we do have a significant time constraint, and we are going to get shut down in not too long, and we have one more speaker. So we're going to try to stick to what we originally said in our emails with you. Thank you so much for your preparation for 10 minutes of opening remarks. Then you're going to get the commissioner questions. As you've seen, we have a hot bench occasionally or always, and the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm going to start. I'm grateful for the work that this commission is doing as we face what is arguably the most dangerous period of our lifetimes with the rise of white supremacists who are attacking the rights of immigrants, trans people, Jews, Muslims, Palestinians, and more. And our best hope in the face of these attacks is standing together. I do want to make a couple of observations based on what has just transpired here in this hearing. The first is, while the commission is rightly concerned with presenting multiple perspectives, the most vocal people on the commission seem to feel that only one perspective is acceptable. The second thing that I'm struck by is the fact that no one on the commission seems to be worried about the single greatest threat to Jews, namely white supremacist anti-Semitism. No one has mentioned white supremacist anti-Semitism. There are three aspects to my identity that I bring to my testimony today. I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. I'm the daughter of Holocaust refugees, and I'm a retired teacher educator. I'm a member of JVP and an anti-Zionist because I am the daughter of Holocaust survivors. The Shoah is baked into my DNA, and that's why I call for Palestinian liberation. JVP has 20,000 supporters in Massachusetts, spanning 285 zip codes with members in 41 Senate districts and 140 state legislative districts. We are fully committed to fighting anti-Semitism and envision a world where all people can live in peace as equals, where the safety of one group does not come at the expense of the safety of another group. Like many Jews, I oppose all forms of religious or ethnic supremacy. That means I don't believe that the U.S. should be a Christian nationalist state. I don't believe that India should be a Hindu state, and I don't believe that that Israel should be a state that privileges Jews over Palestinians. Opposing Jewish nationalism does not mean I'm anti-Semitic any more than opposing Christian nationalism means I'm anti-Christian. It's critically important for students to be able to grapple with these same distinctions in the classroom. This brings me to my identity as a daughter of Holocaust refugees. I'm named after my grandmother, Elsa Warburg, who, like my parents, fled Hitler's Germany. You may know the Warburgs as prominent Jewish bankers, scholars, and lawyers. What you may not know is that most of the Warburgs were anti-Zionist, or at least not Zionists. They argued among themselves about this. It was not an argument about religion. It was an ideological argument about whether or not Jews needed a homeland to ensure Jewish safety. In fact, Jews have argued about Zionism since Zionism was first developed. This kind of debate and contestation are, as Max said, core Jewish values. You may know the joke, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So when I hear the proclamation that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic, spoken as though it were a truism, I understand it to be entirely ahistoric and a complete distortion. Moreover, it casts some Jews as good Jews and other Jews as bad Jews based on their support for Israel, comparing apples, a religion, to oranges, a country. I worry that shutting down examination of differences like these will endanger our democratic classrooms. I worry that teachers will be penalized if they show maps of Palestine like the one that you just saw, or they share the fact that more than 38,000 Palestinian children in Gaza are now orphans, or if they introduce current cases before the International Court of Justice. Censoring this kind of information is an attack on democratic education. Finally, I want to bring my identity as a teacher-educator to this conversation. As any educator knows, the most important thing a teacher can do is to teach students how to think for themselves, to investigate, and to analyze. You heard this from the teacher who spoke a few minutes ago. That means asking questions like, who benefits from this narrative? Who is harmed by it? Whose perspectives are excluded in this story? Can these claims be verified? Even grade schoolers can grapple with questions like this. And here's what I want to really come to as my main point with you. In my view, these are the questions that you as commissioners should be asking. When you hear someone say, as if it is a fact, that accusing Israel of genocide is a blood libel, or when the ADL cites statistics premised on a disputed definition of anti-Semitism, it is incumbent on you to question the assumptions about anti-Semitism they're based on, not to accept them as facts. I wish that you, as commissioners, had interrogated the ADL with as much zeal and vigor as you interrogated Max. I'm not asking the commission to agree with my views on genocide or Zionism. What I'm saying is that it is not up to the state to adjudicate debates that have raged within the Jewish community for more than 100 years. It is not up to the commission to declare that some Jews are good Jews and other Jews are bad Jews, or that some Jewish beliefs should be penalized and others should be privileged. In this audience today, there are many Jews and non-Jews who strongly believe that it is not anti-Semitic to be anti-Zionist. It is not anti-Semitic to call what's happening in Gaza genocide. It is your responsibility in this commission to ensure that teachers have the space to teach students how to ask good questions and understand multiple perspectives. It is the responsibility of this commission to focus its energy on the very real threat to all of us posed by white supremacy. If the commission goes the route of privileging an Israel-centered approach to fighting anti-Semitism, it runs the risk of being seen as a partisan political tool and losing all legitimacy. At this dangerous moment in history, it is the Commission's urgent task to ensure that critical inquiry is the core of our pedagogy.
Thank you. Ms. Najimy?
After that McCarthy-esque inquisition, I don't think it's fair just to say you have 10 minutes, because I have much more than 10 minutes to say to that. As an Arab American educator, I bring to my teaching my own experience with racism. That very racism that I just experienced here. My watch went off telling me my heart rate was elevated to 122. That is a physical manifestation of racism. And I will tell you, Representative, how Hannah would be treated if she went to Gaza. She would be welcomed with open arms. Her family would be brought to the kitchen table and served coffee. And the children and Hannah would run out into the streets and play, even in the rubble now. Because the presumption behind that question is anti-Palestinian racism, that all Palestinians are inherently anti-Semitic, inherently violent, inherently anti-democratic, and inherently terrorist supporting. And whether that was your intention or not, That was the impact of that question. The cherry picking. Would you like me to read you the rest of the resources that you didn't say? Those brave educators that came to you who called me Arab filth. How does that sit with you? So now let me get on to my testimony. The racism I have experienced informs my pedagogy. I have become an anti-racist educator over 35 years of teaching. And anti-Semitism is real, and it is rooted in white supremacy, and it is on the march, and here's what it looks like. Swastikas in schools. Racial taunting of sports teams by other sports teams. Setting fires to synagogues. The replacement theory. Elon Musk's inarguable Nazi salute and his speech at the AfD in Germany. But here's what it isn't. It isn't Palestinians expressing their aspirations of freedom, equal rights, and dignity. It isn't people standing in solidarity with Palestinians or criticizing the state of Israel and the system of Zionism, and it is not naming what the international court calls plausible genocide. Conflating the two, as some of these organizations here have done, is anti-Palestinian racism. It erases Palestinian people and their identity and their connection to the land. It denies the Nakba. It dehumanizes Palestinians, justifying killing. And it defames them, as I said before, inherently anti-Semitic, terrorist sympathizing, anti-democratic. And not only does it defame them as that, but anybody who stands in solidarity with them. And that is certainly not how we're going to fight anti-Semitism. The well-orchestrated attacks on the MTA by the ADL and the JCRC and the AJC and the likes and camera is not a way to fight anti-Semitism. In fact, what it's provoking is violence against other members. Death threats, rape threats, doxing. This idea of balance and perspective. There is no shortage of narrative in this country on what some Israelis and some Jewish Americans think about the history of Palestine. What the MTA provides is the counterbalance. So silencing discourse on Israel and Palestine is only leading to a deeper a distrust and an anger at the organizations that are doing it. That keeps no one safe. So here's what we need to do instead. And here's where my 35 years of being an anti-racist educator teaching elementary school comes in. We teach anti-Semitism as one of the many forms of systematic oppression. We help students develop critical thinking by interrogating history and giving them a context. We follow DESE's guidelines of history and social science principles and use the Stop Bullying government resources that talk about how to talk about bullying. We integrate humanizing stories as early as preschool, where children can see the similarities and the humanity amongst different identities. We introduce stereotypes and stereotype busting and explore social issues by mid-elementary school. We study conflicts in middle school and high school by providing that historical context, examining primary sources, multiple narratives, deliberating and debating to help kids make informed decisions. We engage students in looking at their own identity and social positions, getting them to consider how their relationship to the subject influences how they understand the subject and how they've come to think about the other, and where they get their information from, and how it shapes their preconceived notions. We approach situations that do arise with inquiry and empathy, making space for hard conversations. We have to take the lead of Michael Roth, the president of Wesleyan, who walked through the encampments daily and wrote in an op-ed in the New York Times, I made clear that if any Jewish student felt harassed, I would intervene. I also said that I can ensure their ability to pursue their education, but that I could not protect them from being offended. We need to understand the difference between being offended and being unsafe. And finally, we create affinity spaces and have trusted adults available to help all students process events in the world that impact their lives and to help them distinguish between comfort and safety. And I'm happy to get into the details of what those things could look like in the classroom.
Thank you.
We're out of seating order. Thank you so much. I come to this conversation with a little bit of a different lens. I'm not a public school educator. I'm a 15-plus year Jewish educator on a lot of things, including social justice and anti-Semitism. I'm also the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, a social worker trained in trauma-informed care, and I am a proud product of the Massachusetts school system. So I think well done. My ancestors, my teachers, my rabbis taught me about machlochet m'shem shemayim, argument for the sake of heaven. There are Jews in this room, there are Jews on this panel, some of whom I know pretty well, who I've sat with in coffee shops and argued about this kind of stuff with. There are Jews in this room. There are Jews on this panel with whom I don't agree with fully, and we sit here together because we care deeply about this issue. And the bottom line is my ancestors, my teachers, my rabbis have all taught me that fighting anti-Semitism is not just about protecting Jews. It's about fighting the systems that enable it, the fear that fuels it, and the divisions that keep us from building real safety for all people. Anti-Semitism is real and it's unique. And as an educator, I teach that anti-Semitism is a real and ongoing threat across political lines. But I also see how it's too often used as a weapon to divide Jewish communities from our natural allies, to silence dissent and criticism, and to push a scarcity mindset that isolates us rather than building solidarity. Anti-Semitism education is not a zero-sum game. And when we teach that anti-Semitism is interconnected with other forms of oppression, we deepen our collective understanding and strengthen all movements for justice. What I've found in 15 plus years of teaching this framing, teenagers, which is generally who I teach with, teenagers and up, middle school and up maybe, they come back to me with stories of stronger relationships with their non-Jewish peers in their schools. They've been able to explain when anti-Semitism has shown up to their administrators, and they feel supported by the learning we've done together to do so. My grandparents' survival was about resistance, and it was about relationships. One thing I carry from my family's history is that Jewish survival has never just been about Jews. My grandparents, Maurice and Helene of blessed memory, weren't saved by Jewish exceptionalism. They were saved by those who resisted, by those who refused to comply with unjust laws, by those who saw their struggle as interconnected with others. And they were resettled by Hias, God willing, that stays around under this administration. They came to this country and they joined the ILGWU garment workers and the typographers unions. They were active in movements for justice. They participated in democracy because they knew what it meant to experience hate firsthand. Their memories are motivators for me, and their hands are at my backs today. We need an expansive framework, not a narrow one. I agree with you. We need an expansive framework. And when I talk about anti-Semitism, I ask my students, are we talking about it as part of a broader struggle against white supremacy, authoritarianism, and all forms of oppression? And that's what I want this commission to consider as part of this important task. It does not exist in a vacuum. If we only fight for ourselves as Jews, and this is me talking to the Jews on the panel, the Jews who are listening to this, I don't know, I'm speaking to that. We have to think about how it interacts with Islamophobia, anti-Black racism, anti-Palestinian racism, transphobia, and all forms of hate, because they are used as a tool in part of a larger fight. Some of the ways this might manifest in policies and ways that you can have an impact in the state of Massachusetts. Rapid incident responses. Calling attention to an increasing awareness about hate violence is one of the most important things you can do. Data and reporting. Marginalized communities feel safest reporting incidents to community-based organizations, not to state agencies and not to law enforcement. So figuring out funding for this, software, training, and hotlines so that communities can actually report and then make determinations about what they want done with that information. Community education. A lot of incidents happen with bystanders and upstanders there. What is the intervention training that can happen? Intercommunal collaboration. Finding ways to fund religious communities working together on things like food distribution and other work that way, so that there are pro-social activity that builds trust. Restorative justice programs for minors in ways that, for anything that does not qualify as a hate crime, creating restorative justice programs in schools that allow young people to work through collaboratively. These are the kinds of things, yes, I know you're working on curriculum, but these are programs and these are things that are proven to work as preventative measures, not proactive, not reactive measures. I hope this commission considers all of our testimony here today as a charge to include diverse voices, because I did hear a lot of concern about diversity in the earlier conversation. But I am concerned that that diversity feels like you're concerned about one side of it. And I want you to approach this crucial issue from a solidarity framework and to consider how to encourage critical thinking and inquiry-based frameworks amongst the student body. And when I bring that solidarity framework to my students, I have found them and their parents grateful for the nuanced conversations they have, the ability to turn questions over, and to understand complicated ideas like this in an opening and fruitful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Cataldo, Chair Vilas, and members of the commission. My name is Sana Fadl. I'm a public school parent from Newton. And my testimony will focus on 3 topics. The first is weaponizing the IRA definition in Title VI claims. The second is censorship in curricula. And third are the political goals of the silencing and censoring we have been talking about. The recommendations of the Biden's national strategy to counter anti-Semitism rests on defining anti-Semitism, strongly favoring the IRA definition. This definition, which we unequivocally oppose, whether adopted formally or used informally, expands the definition of anti-Semitism to include not only incidents of hate and discrimination against Jewish people, but also certain criticism of the State of Israel. Limiting the applicability of civil rights laws based on one's political views on a foreign government is extremely troubling. A new category of, quote, anti-Israel bias or hate is being used to threaten basic tenets of a democratic society. First, our right to criticize, protest, and advocate to influence our own government's policies and actions. And second, our children's right to a robust education that prepares them to be critical thinkers to fully participate in our democracy. So Massachusetts laws do not regulate any other form of hate or racism, incorporating attitudes towards a foreign government or a political ideology. Nor do our policies or laws seek to erase and criminalize an entire peoples, namely Palestinians. That would be no different than claiming that hostility towards Iran and Afghanistan is Islamophobic, or being pro-Russian is anti-Ukrainian or otherwise, as a form of hate. But instead, imposing that view on discipline, curriculum, and professional development is what we're hearing today. The formal adoption of, again, quote, anti-Israel bias in our state's policies and administration were laid the groundwork for 1, silencing and disciplining of students and teachers, 2, control of schools' curricula through censorship and book banning, and 3, inflating and distorting data on anti-Semitism in schools. This may make the classroom more comfortable for some students by avoiding difficult discussions about Israel and Palestine in the classroom, but adopting those recommendations does not make Jewish students safe. We oppose using allegations of a hostile learning environment to advocate for the erasure and criminalization of Palestinian history, culture, or humanity. This conflation of being safe and feeling safe is reminiscent of the anti-equity arguments that discussing systems of oppression and supremacy and its legacy makes individual students uncomfortable. This argument assumes students are incapable of understanding systemic oppression as opposed to individual biases. Similarly, a definition of anti-Semitism that is deeply intertwined with creating a new category of rights, again, anti-Israel, leaves no space for students and parents, Jewish or otherwise, who do not adhere to this ideology. Teachers have been accused of promoting a hostile learning environment when sharing balanced classroom materials which include Palestinian perspectives. or if students share or even acknowledge empathy and identification with Palestinians. I'm going to share some examples from public schools that I've heard from. One example, a student spoke sympathizing with Palestinians and called for peace. Another Palestinian student, first student was not Palestinian. This student, a Palestinian student, was about to speak at an event, and before even speaking, because of his Palestinian heritage, he was asked to there was a campaign to censor him. Anyone who called for a ceasefire before the Biden-Harris administration called for a ceasefire was called anti-Semitic. Fabricated accusations against an educator to build a case for parental review of all curricular material related to Israel and Palestine. Schools that issued a statement expressing concern for Israelis, including concern for Palestinians in the same sentence. A school that included Palestinian narratives in its curriculum. A school worksheet referencing historic Palestine before 1948. The scapegoating of the MTA is also an example. These are all examples. I'm happy to go into any of them if you need. The underlying theme in all of these examples is a mere accusation was all that was necessary to append a student or teacher's life with the bigger goal of influencing the staffing and curricula in a school district. You too will hear these stories, but they will be presented to you as examples of anti-Semitism, and it is your job to get into the facts and motivations behind those stories. It is not anti-Semitic for Palestinians to speak openly about their own experiences. And to suggest as much serves to only silence Palestinian voices and heighten anti-Palestinian racism. So campaigns to control the curricula and censor it, and censor of books are not new to Massachusetts schools. We've seen it in my school district. But the Commission must not appease calls to control educational materials that do not center and support Israel. The distortion and the misrepresentation of Palestinians' culture and history and their political aspirations as anti-Semitic dangerously diverts attention away from acts of hate targeting Jewish people and institutions. There's also a long-standing campaign to censor Massachusetts' own history and social studies frameworks. This summer, Camera, a right-wing Israeli advocacy organization, summarized their approach. And I quote, "Teaching about Palestine really means teaching anti-Israel bias and propaganda." That was all. That was the entire argument. Both the AJC and the JSCRC blasted ethnic studies curricula in public schools, marrying right-wing attacks on the same ethnic studies curricula that address colonial histories in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, or even arguments that teaching about slavery makes white students unsafe. This extends systemically by calls to censor history and social studies curricula that present Palestinian perspectives alongside Israeli perspectives. 2 months ago, a federal appeals court ruled that a curriculum that merely makes people feel uncomfortable is not discriminatory, nor does the inclusion of anti-Zionist material preclude students from exercising their religion. Happy to quote that ruling if you need. As a parent, I want my children to be challenged. I am grateful to every teacher who has used their position to protect our children's right to learn. It is appalling to me to see educators treated and smeared as the enemy. I also stand behind my educators' unions because our teachers cannot do this alone. My children need the union to have our educators' backs so that they can have our children's backs. And I'm going to end with 2 quotes. The first is from Vice President Vance, who echoed President Nixon. "The professors are the enemy." And I'm going to quote a response from Professor Jason Stanley, author of Erasing History. "The leaders of the movement to attack universities and schools are all Ivy League grads. These guys are sending their kids to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. They're attacking the educational institutions and the universities because the universities provide critical inquiry into the kinds of myths that's required for these kinds of politics. This kind of politics elevates the dominant group. Erasing history paves the way for ethnic, racial, and religious nationalism." Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to turn it over to the commissioners in a minute. I want to take this opportunity to thank Governor Healy for her excellent appointments to this commission. I want to thank Speaker Mariano for his appointments of the ADL and AJC representatives. President Spilka for her appointment of the AJC's leader, the JCRC's leader, and all of the appointing authorities for their excellent appointments of thoughtful people who are truly committed to combating anti-Semitism. And I want to make very clear that attempts to undermine the credibility of mainstream Jewish organizations in Massachusetts have no credibility with this commission. None. The use of tragedy experienced by Palestinian civilians, and there is plenty to go around, plenty, as a weapon to attack a core part of Jewish identity for many Jews, not all, many. As a way to attack their religious and ethnic identity is not only bereft of any moral, logical, or intellectual coherence, it is anti-Semitic.
Can you clarify what you mean by that?
Reducing the history of a people, reducing their history, thinning out a people's past, especially a people who have just barely survived several attempts at extermination, is anti-Semitic. But
Are you referring to the Palestinians?
Trying to do
It seems that you're referring to the Palestinians with that comment.
Folks, we just got to have a little bit of order. Please finish what you're saying. We'll have a back and forth, but I don't think we're going to get anywhere if we're just having a back and forth, everybody speaking over each other. Thank you.
trying to do that to our children in our classrooms, that is dangerous. Mr. Chairman?
That's precisely the point that we're making, that it is dangerous for the commission to be one-sided.
So I guess, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and first and foremost, thank you for your testimony today. I fundamentally am at a loss when you say that the commission is being one-sided, when the very nature of certainly my line of questioning, right, was the fact that I look at let me ask a question. Have folks here had an opportunity, have members of this panel had an opportunity to look at the recommended curriculum from the MTA?
I didn't hear that.
Curriculum.
So
I have the whole list. I would be happy to go through it with you. And I would be happy to explain that the posters you saw were political art that comes from a context of occupation. And who were the masked Palestinians throwing stones at? Israeli tanks. And what's the response of the Israelis to throwing stones? The policy was break arms. I was in the West Bank last April. I work in a kindergarten there. My kindergarten was tear gassed. The Israeli soldiers came in to the kindergarten.
So my question, my statement rather, all right, we need to bring back some order to this. My statement, if you listen to what I had to say, was that if you look at whatever those MTA resources was that they were overwhelmingly one perspective.
Okay.
And so this notion that folks have made on the panel that we are of a certain ilk in terms of our perspective, indicating that we are taking you fill in the blanks, is not warranted based on the questions that many members of this commission made. Did you read the resources?
I've seen what has been presented here today.
No. Just
I have not looked. No, I have not. I have not had access to the full MTA.
Okay, so I guess what I would say is this. So separate and distinct from the pictures, I would at some point in time take a look at the articles, the books, etc. And if you come back with any perspective other than they tell clearly one side of the story, I'll be surprised, and we'll have that dialogue.
Right. And my understanding is that, again, that's the MTA, which is the teachers' union, and is not the curriculum mandated by the state of Massachusetts. Am I correct?
You are correct.
Thank you. And again, not a public school educator, but an educator who understands the way that classrooms run and the way that teachers create curriculum. I'm also deeply embedded with a lot of teachers across the state. I guess my question is, one of the concerns that I have is that this entire conversation has been about Israel-Palestine. And as someone who cares deeply about anti-Semitism education, you will notice that my conversation was about solidarity frameworks. My conversation was about how do we protect students in the Commonwealth across lines. And I have not heard questions about white supremacy. I have not heard questions about what are we doing to keep students safe. I have not heard questions about, okay, I am concerned about this from the MTA. What are you providing that is an alternative?
Ms. Diamond, thank you for
Yeah,
pointing that out.
I would like to brief.
I was delighted to hear a bunch of your suggestions, which this is our fourth meeting. At several of the prior meetings we've discussed and plan to go more deeply into restorative justice and some of the other techniques that you mentioned. I'm not assuming that any speaker comes here having watched all three of our meetings, but this is one, and we have a charge that goes until November 20th. Happy to turn it over to another commissioner, Commissioner Friedman.
Thank you so much. So I have to make a confession. I'm an idealist. I think that we can try to make progress as a society, as a community. And my questions for you really are to try to find common ground, okay? I agree with you on white supremacists and the right-wing anti-Semitism that's existed, and it's something I mentioned in our opening statements, the first meeting of this commission. Ms. Auerbach, you may have been in the audience, but I feel strongly that there are neo-Nazis in the state, and it's a serious issue. So my questions are looking for common ground, and I want to talk about inclusiveness, and I think it's fair to say that you come here as your coalition is called Together for an Inclusive Massachusetts, is that right? And in the spirit of inclusion, I'm going to ask all of you these questions. And I hear you that you're talking about hard stuff and saying, like, let's not dissent voices and we want to have dialogue. I think I hear that. I hope I hear that. I hope I hear you saying we want to have dialogue, we don't want to stifle voices, if that's what I'm hearing. So I guess my first question is, and this is for all of you to be inclusive, would you agree with me that here in the US, pro-Palestinians should have a right to have their views on Israel and Palestinian issues, and they shouldn't be excluded from a school or a building or an organization simply because of their views? Can we agree on that?
Absolutely.
We can, but it isn't the reality.
Do you all agree?
Do we all agree?
Do you agree? Okay, great. Second question is, how about Zionists? Do they also have a right to their views on Israel and Palestinian issues, and the right not to be excluded from a school or a building or an organization simply because of their views?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I want to ask about one example and get your honest reaction, okay? And I'd like to, in a moment, share a video, actually. A video is posted on Instagram by a pro-Palestinian group. People have a First Amendment right, obviously, to protest stuff and to express their political views. And the video shows that in July 2024, right before the National Educators Association conference, there was an NEA union conference. At least one of you participated in a march with a group of protesters. And the chant you'll hear from the video says, NEA, the union, can't you hear, we don't want no Zionists here. Kyle, can you play the video, please? Hopefully the tech works. And my question for you, I hope you heard that, it said, NEA, can't you hear, we don't want no Zionists here. So trying to find common ground and work together, you're talking about inclusion. Do you believe that that chant was okay, or would you join me in disavowing it and saying in the spirit of inclusion that that's not an appropriate chant to call for a union to exclude people based on their views?
What I would say is I'm deaf. And what I mean by that is I am deaf. What I mean by that is I go to many, many demonstrations where I don't agree with every single thing that people chant.
But that wasn't my question. I'm asking you today, is that an appropriate chant to say let's exclude Zionists, or do you say,
It
no, that was
depends.
not appropriate?
It completely
It's a simple
depends
question.
on the context. It completely depends on the context.
I'd like to hear from all of you. Does it depend on the context? That's a famous answer we heard before.
So again, this is turning into an Elise Stefanik, let's
It's not meant to
grill.
be.
But
Mary,
David,
I'm
it's
trying to
feeling
see if
that
we
way.
can agree on anything.
David, it's feeling that way. right? We're actually here to talk about, I gave you a list of 10 things that we can be doing in our schools. The reason why we brought up the conflation of the criticism of the state of Israel and Palestine is because that's the reality. And that's what too many movements are focusing on as anti-Semitism. And there is a dangerous consequence. And not only that, it's backfiring. The Lapin Foundation came to Concord Carlisle High School because there was a real incident there. There was a swastika written, I think, on the bathroom wall, and it needed to be addressed. The Lapin Foundation came in and did, I wasn't there, but the stories that I heard, they presented the ADL data. One of the high school teachers pointed out the flaw and then said, I also am an activist with other Jewish people in my town who were part of the encampment, and they said they felt completely welcomed. And there was such beauty in everybody participating in the Seder, everybody participating.
I understand, but I was asking about a chant to exclude Zion. Okay, I
And
hope you answer my
we
question.
we are very limited on time, so
And
I just
then
ask Ms. Najimy that you answer the
students
commissioner's
came by
question.
all day afterwards and said to her, thank you for saying what was on my mind.
Are you going to
What's on my
answer his
mind was
question?
my lived
What I'm
experience.
saying is that we have to stop punishing and intimidating the conversations in school, as far as that goes.
Please answer the
There
question.
are two very different ways that people can be. People can be activists on the street, participating in a rally with a lot of other multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious people, saying a thing, and be in a different space being an educator. One has not, it is only when what happens outside of school turns into discrimination against your students that it becomes a problem. I could point out, again, a cherry-picked example. I could point out 15 examples of aggressive things said against Palestinians.
The question was whether it's inclusive to chant, "We don't want no Zionist here." Are there any other commissioners who have questions? Done. Are there any other commissioners who have questions? Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming.
Before they leave.
All right, we have. We're going to keep moving along, and we'd ask you to be as quiet as you can. Obviously, filter out, and that's totally okay. Just try to keep the noise down as much as you can. We do have one more speaker, Commissioner Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both of our chairs for today's hearing, which has been revealing. I had no questions for the prior panel. I do want to note that many of the recommendations made by Ms. Diamond are ones that I fully agree with and concur with and are part of the national strategy for combating anti-Semitism and should not be lost in future discussions of this commission. And they are aligned with the recommendations I made at the very first hearing of this commission when I presented the national plan. I do, however, feel the obligation to name some things for my colleagues on this commission. Sitting here, I am struck as a person who represents a diverse network of progressive, conservative, religious, cultural, and other institutions, the largest and broadest collective voice of the Jewish community in Massachusetts, though certainly not unanimous, that we all have a responsibility to listen to and grapple with a spectrum of viewpoints, and that we need to model the practice of welcoming viewpoint diversity in our work. Doing so adds complexity to our deliberations and will strengthen our outcomes. It is a behavior and practice that we as a broader society are losing the ability to do. We flatten one another's identities and ideas, and we swiftly categorize each other as of the left or of the right, as pro or anti-something. As this commission continues our work, we must push against binaries about anti-Semitism, about who truly cares about each other or has concern for each other. By way of example, just one binary that we were asked to accept from the previous panel. Their written submission attests, and it's in the packet that was sent to the commission and is on the website. Their written submission attests that anti-Zionists represent as many as 69% of American Jews. If you follow the link this panel provided, the poll they cited defined Zionism. The poll they cited defined Zionism as, and I quote, the belief in privileging Jewish rights over non-Jewish rights in Israel. By their definition, I myself, who serves on the board of an Israeli-Palestinian co-led organization working for the full equality of Palestinian citizens of Israel, would have to define myself as an anti-Zionist. By their logic, the organization I lead, JCRC, would be considered anti-Zionist because one of our core commitments is to the realization of the aspirations in Israel's Declaration of Statehood, which commits that Israel, quote, will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. And I will say that while this commitment has certainly not been fully realized, the definition of anti-Zionism offered by this panel would mean that Israel's founders were anti-Zionist for having written and aspired to that declaration. While I am setting the record right, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism is not itself controversial. It is full of conditional caveats in which it discusses examples that could or may be understood to be anti-Semitic in a certain context. What is at times controversial is how this definition gets applied by some, including by ignoring those conditional statements or trying to apply it beyond its purpose as a non-binding working definition. For the record, IRA has been embraced by 4 consecutive United States administrations, beginning with its adoption by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, thanks to the leadership of then Secretary of State John Kerry. IRA is the official definition in Massachusetts by executive order. And yes, we at JCRC embrace and use IRA as a non-binding working definition to further the understanding of anti-Semitism. And we have been on record for several years that we do not support its codification in state law, such as through the bill referenced in the panel submission materials. And commissioners should be aware that there are other definitions that are used by some, notably the so-called Jerusalem Declaration, which has been endorsed by some progressive organizations and by respected academics. But regardless of whether you prefer to use the official Massachusetts definition for your understanding of anti-Semitism, the difference in these definitions are largely a matter of emphasis and nuance and not of substantive difference when it comes to understanding anti-Semitic behaviors. For example, and I'm reading here from the Jerusalem Declaration, not from IRA. Quote, what is particular in classic anti-Semitism is the idea that Jews are linked to the forces of evil. This stands at the core of many anti-Jewish fantasies, such as the idea of a Jewish conspiracy, in which the Jews possess hidden power that they use to promote their own collective agenda and at the expense of other people. This linkage between Jews and evil continues in the present, in the fantasy that the Jews control governments with a hidden hand. And further, this Jerusalem definition says that with regards to Israel and Palestine, Examples that on the face of it are anti-Semitic include holding Jews collectively responsible for Israel's conduct, or treating Jews simply because they are Jewish as agents of Israel, and assuming that non-Israeli Jews, simply because they are Jews, are necessarily more loyal to Israel than to their own countries. I would like to note that the organizations represented on this panel publicly opposed the establishment of this commission, including in a letter to the legislative leadership in June 2024, and in a vociferous but failed campaign urging the governor to veto the legislation establishing this commission. In their campaign against this commission, and even as recently as this week, they have continued to evoke the kinds of tropes and themes that the Jerusalem Declaration defines as classic anti-Semitism. This coalition objected to the process by which this commission was established and claims, wrongly, that the public was only informed of this bill after its passage. In fact, the bill establishing this commission was filed publicly as an amendment to the budget and was debated for an hour on the Senate floor before it was adopted. They complain about the exclusion of public comment during the legislative process establishing this commission. It is worth noting that by design, a commission is established to enable a robust public conversation before legislative recommendations are put forward. They talk repeatedly, and you can see it in their materials, about how so-called, quote, Israel-aligned, unquote, organizations are participating in this process. The implication being that the broadest representative bodies of Massachusetts Jewish community are agents of a foreign government, and that our engagement with the legislature is somehow tainted because we represent a community that has broad and deep attachments to a Jewish homeland and to our people who live there, even as we hold great diversity within our community about the meaning of that attachment and how it informs our politics. Just this weekend, a lead member of this coalition, Mass Peace Action, sent out an email regarding today's hearing, saying that this coalition, quote, came together in response to a backdoor effort supported by Israel-aligned advocacy groups to shape anti-Semitism policy, end quote. This kind of rhetoric is hardly surprising, given that 3 years ago, Mass Peace Action and other members of this coalition openly celebrated and amplified the dangerous Boston Mapping Project, which was a call to action to literally, quote, dismantle our local Boston Jewish community. At our first hearing, I shared with this commission that the national strategy to combat anti-Semitism explicitly states that anti-Semitism has unique characteristics that require tailored responses and can manifest distinctively, and also that the national strategy and the implementation of it requires us to understand that anti-Semitism does not exist in a vacuum. I said that anti-Semitism and other forms of hate do not operate in isolation from one another, nor should the communities they target. Understanding how anti-Semitism is a specific and distinct form of hatred also allows us to understand how it manifests in different ways across the ideological and political spectrum, even when that will be uncomfortable and inconvenient for those who only want to fight anti-Semitism when it serves their partisan or ideological agendas. Again, I thank the chairs for providing what has truly been a revealing and illuminating day so far.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your very well thought out statement. Yes.
I think was Superintendent or Commissioner Polanski, who is online. Commissioner, did you want to say something? Okay. We are going to invite up our last speaker, Catherine Craven. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who's made it this far. Madam Chair, I'd ask you to introduce yourself to the members of the commission and make any remarks that you'd like.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me here today. Chairman Vilas, Chairman Cataldo, and distinguished members. Oh, can you hear me?
Sorry, if you can just speak a little bit louder. I think those in the back. The speaker only goes online.
Oh, okay.
But it doesn't amplify in the room, so folks may have trouble hearing.
Okay. Thank you for having me here today. Chairman Vilas, Chairman Cataldo, distinguished members of the commission. My name is Catherine Craven. I'm a proud Boston Public Schools graduate and the mother of 5 children who are current or former public school children in Brookline, including one son who's now an adult but still at Brookline High, who has Down syndrome and is nonverbal. I have had the honor of being appointed to the State Board of Education by Governor Deval Patrick, and was appointed as chair of the Board of Education by Governor Charlie Baker, and reappointed as chair of the Board of Education by Governor Maura Healey. Our board has 11 volunteer members, and I am so proud to serve with all of these talented individuals, one of whom, Matt Hills, is here today. The culture and climate of public education is always evolving, and the core values underpinning what the Board of Education does is really important for me to establish here today to provide some context as to what the roles and responsibilities are for our board. My understanding of the work of the Board of Education is rooted in my service in this building starting over 30 years ago at the House Ways and Means Committee, having helped co-create 10 state budgets. My budget service took place at a very exciting time in Massachusetts when the state legislature made a commitment to 351 cities and towns to deliberately increase billions of dollars in state taxpayer investment into local public schools and to simultaneously create a mechanism for accountability and standards for the assurance of learning. Massachusetts has historically embraced a balanced approach to defining accountability between the local educational authorities and the Commonwealth. As such, the State Board of Education has a key role in this balance, but only insofar as our legislative mandate allows. This is a continual and evolving set of circumstances with some boundaries established by the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court in their 1993 McDuffie decision, which also warned that the Commonwealth could not, quote, wholly delegate the implementation of this duty of education to local governments, and, quote, such power does not include a right to abdicate the obligation imposed on magistrates, the executive, and legislatures placed on them by the Constitution. The State Board role is based upon the founding principles of Horace Mann, himself the father of National Free Public Education and founder of our Board of Education, which is the first of its kind and the oldest in this country, founded in 1837. He was also the Senate President from 1836 to 1837 upstairs. Horace Mann's 6 fundamental propositions: number 1, that a republic cannot long remain ignorant and free, hence the necessity of universal popular education. Number 2, that such education must be paid for, controlled, and sustained by an interested public. Number 3, that such education is best provided in schools embracing children of all religious, social, and ethnic backgrounds. Number 4, that such education, while profoundly moral in character, must be free of sectarian religious influence. Number 5, that such education must be permeated throughout by the spirits, methods, and discipline of a free society, which preclude harsh pedagogy in the classroom. And number 6, that such education can be provided only by well-trained professional teachers. Mann was motivated to act because of the quality of Massachusetts education, despite boasting the first public school in the United States of America, had deteriorated in his lifetime and become too subject to the whims of economy-minded local politicians. Much of the Board of Education's official role, even today, remains as it was in the time of Horace Mann. The Board of Education is mainly charged with collecting and publicizing school information and providing balancing regulatory environments throughout the state. We rely upon our local partners at the school district level to interpret and comply with guidance and resources provided by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. But I am here today to discuss some of our role with respect to ensuring the safety of our Jewish students in Massachusetts to their federal right to a free and appropriate public education, because we are aware of the precipitous increase of bullying of Jewish students and the emergence of cultures and climates across the Commonwealth that are not welcoming to Jewish students, especially after October 7th. In some cases, this bullying has required students to change schools or stop going to school altogether, which is a sign that school culture is not protecting our Jewish students. I want to state emphatically and for the record
that the members of the Massachusetts Board of Education abhor the discrimination of any student and any culture that makes a student feel less than or singles them out, particularly on the basis of their religion, and this is a clear violation of federal laws, and law enforcement should be handling that. But there are 3 areas of the department's role that I wish to outline, and then we'll open up for questions. Number 1, bullying. Number 2, curriculum frameworks. And number 3, teacher certification. First topic of bullying. We have been in receipt of data at the board that shows Jewish students are being bullied at record levels with the positioning of Zionism as an epithet. Cases of students being bullied for outwardly expressing their religious identity as persons of Jewish faith or identity have been submitted to the board. No student can learn effectively in a culture of fear. We abhor these incidents and must take them seriously. The legislature gave DESE the authority to monitor district policies on bullying, which must be submitted every 2 years to the department. There should be some guidance from the Commonwealth on what constitutes hate speech without the incursion of any student's free speech rights. Nobody should be the victim of hate because they identify as a Jew or a Zionist. Clearly, there are some districts that are exemplars for us to hold up as examples of good behavior for other school districts that have figured out a way to do this well, and we at the Board of Education should be holding those up as examples to the Commonwealth as well. And as chair, you have my commitment that the board will be closely monitoring the department's progress in reviewing and promoting best practices in anti-bullying efforts. Number 2 is curriculum frameworks. Currently, the Department of Education and the Board of Education do not prescribe any curriculum or for any district. So this is important because I've even heard it said here today that the board gives out curriculum. That is the opposite of the truth. We provide curriculum frameworks that are voted on as a result of a large public process and a lot of experts that come in behind the scenes to work with the department. And this has been going on since 1993 when the education reform law was passed that puts the qualifications of what a curricular matter is really at the local level. Okay, so curriculum is selected by your local, most of the time like a superintendent of curriculum at your local educational authority, but it should be conforming to curriculum frameworks and standards because the learning outcomes that are inherent in those are what is being called for accountability from the state. It's only been very recently, however, that this system has been effectively dismantled because of the MCAS repeal. And so we are still searching for ways on how this is going to work going forward. But under the current system, local selection of curriculum leaves a wide range of options for your local administrators across 389 school districts, even though there are only 351 cities and towns to embark upon. And so DESE does not provide the curriculum materials, but we do provide professional development. We do provide curriculum for free on our website that any district could take up and promote within. However, the local professional development has proven to be a cumbersome and expensive activity for them. And in certain districts, I'll give you an example of something not related to this, which is science of reading-based reading instruction, which, again, we have broad buy-in from a lot of districts that they would love to take on a new curriculum based on the science of reading to first K through 3 grades, but can't afford to at this time because of professional development. And so, again, that's a little bit of a nuance here about what it is that, especially as legislators can figure what's happening next with education reform, basically. So currently, as a result of this dispersion, the board and the department do not have the data or understanding of how widespread anti-Semitic curriculum could be dispersed across the Commonwealth. Anecdotally, we are hearing tales of this from children as young as 1st and 2nd grade being exposed to anti-Semitic curriculum. And then finally, teacher certification. Currently, although DESE certifies teachers for work in the Commonwealth, there is a limited role after initial certification because local districts approve and select teacher professional development programs. Current and past practice have shown DESE's role to be limited to the initial certification process. So I will take some questions, but it is an honor to be called before you today. We have a lot of work to do in Massachusetts to get our student learning back on track after the disruption of the pandemic. But we are very clearly aligned as a board that no student should be denied a public education or have such impaired because of someone else's ideological bias being projected upon a young person in Massachusetts classrooms. No student should be taught to hate anybody, but especially today, Jewish people are Zionists, sometimes by use of centuries-old tropes. We need to object to taxpayer-funded, ideologically biased curriculum that crosses this line. Any propagation of bias through local or state-funded public schools is antithetical to the core values of a free and appropriate public education in a democracy. We need to reject the false paradigm that providing a safe space for Jews and Israeli Americans in our schools requires us to compromise the rights of other students. It is essentially important that everyone in the Commonwealth be committed to addressing anti-Semitism head-on. We need to foster a culture in which any form of Jew hate is taken as seriously as we take all incidents of bias and discrimination based upon a student's race, gender, or sexual orientation. I am committed to helping foster this truly inclusive culture, and that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education sets a clear tone in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner, so I guess, well, again, first and foremost, thank you so much for being here, and appreciate you staying for the hours that you've been here. I'm actually more concerned than I was when I got here today. And here's what I mean by that. The actual curriculum, to your point, and please, please, please correct me if I misstate something, because that was a lot, comes from local, the superintendent, school committees, et cetera, at the local level. Whereas your role is more, I don't want to say abstract, but not the curriculum. We've heard today about some of these recommendations that have been made from the Mass Teachers Association. So a concern I have, and you tell me if it's an unfounded concern, is that all of these webinars are going on out there. Teachers and educators from local districts, presumably, would be attending some of them. Leave those thinking that, hey, this makes a lot of sense. This was presented by a very prominent, preeminent organization. This makes sense for me to bring in for my curriculum to teach my kids. And if the state, i.e. you folks at the board, your job is not to kind of provide that oversight, I view that as a really, really big problem. Am I missing something?
You are not.
Have you had an opportunity to look at some of these recommendations?
I can't say that I'm completely familiar with them, so I apologize.
I'm not, you want to know what? Strike that. I'm not even going to, I would ask you at your convenience when you have some time to take a look at them. Because one of the things that I firmly believe, and that we've heard really from all parties here, is that diversity of views, diversities of opinions is really, really critical. My overarching point throughout today, and I hope I've been clear, and I haven't been, let me make that point again, is that the documents put forward as recommendations from the MTA are anything but well-balanced. In fact, they are the diametric opposite of being well-balanced. And my concern, again, is that the locals, who, let's be honest, I've got, I said it at the beginning, I've got any number of teachers who ensured that I was a proud graduate of Westfield High School. They are some of the most impactful people in my life. But would I agree with the statement that they could be some of the world's foremost authorities on the most intense, complex, nuanced geopolitical conflict in the world? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe they are. The point is that they're receiving this information. They're impressionable. Their kids are going to be impressionable. They're going to look at this and they're going to say, this was really mean-spirited of those Jewish folks to do that. And that's my concern, that these materials themselves, if allowed to enter our K through 12 districts, are going to lead to more anti-Semitism. And I think that's a really, really big problem. And I guess I would finish by saying this. It is my hope that as we move forward, as this commission moves forward in our work, that we can continue to work for you, because I firmly believe that if we allow these resources as written currently to enter our K through 12 schools, we have failed. And I've said it before, but I'm going to put an exclamation point on it. I think it is education malpractice, the documents as they currently exist. Thank you. Questions from the commission? Please.
It's good to see you. I'd like to take us back in time about a year, because some of the materials that were submitted by others who spoke today noted a meeting that the board held in January of 2024, and noted that my organization, ADL, and others who are represented here offered policy recommendations that, if adopted, would reverse Massachusetts' high standards and deprive students of benefiting from our state's exemplary practices of inquiry, equity, and inclusion by dehumanizing Palestinians and erasing them from social studies, history, and ELA curricula. I was at that meeting. That wasn't my takeaway, but you're the commissioner, so I would like to ask you what the takeaway was for the board, and how they acted on what you heard last January.
Thank you for asking me that, Commissioner. There has been no action taken as a result, official action by the Board of Education taken as a result of any of the public comments that we heard from you, the folks that were there in January 24th, or many of the people that were at this table just before me who appeared in February. So there's been equal time in front of the Board of Education for these matters. But again, the discussion of where the board can weigh in on something that is almost wholly a local issue, other than for the reach that we have through bullying, through the legislation that the legislature gave the state DESE, because we collect bullying plans. And the question I have on that is, like, where's the enforcement of that, right? Where does that belong? The next level of curriculum, which is we send out the frameworks. We actually offer free recommended curriculum. We call it the green light curriculum on our website, but you don't have to take it if you're a district. And then the third thing is teacher certification, which Senator Vilas talked about today, which is, we don't have a gateway. We do a lot of recommending and guidelines, and not a lot of prescriptive things to districts, I guess, is the way to put it.
No, right. I appreciate that.
So to answer your question specifically and with emphasis, equal time has been given to everybody at the Board of Education at the table, but there hasn't been enough follow-up from my liking on what we're doing as a board about the issues that we're seeing. And part of this has been waiting for the work of the commission to see what's going to come out of this as well. So we look forward to that.
No, thank you for that. I think that the first part of my question was really about what was communicated by the groups that are here, which my recollection was a great detailing of incidents of anti-Semitism that have been appearing in the schools, and what the tenor and tone of that was, not so much the characterization that appeared in other materials submitted to the commission today. And I just would like to, again, just ask if your recollection from back in January, when many of us spoke about the extent of anti-Semitism in K through 12 schools, was really the documentation of it versus how it was characterized in the submitted materials about reversing Massachusetts' high standards and erasing Palestinians from social studies, history, and ELA curricula.
In specific response to that question, I have never seen anything from any group that does what you're talking about in front of the Board of Education or the Department of Education. So that is absolutely something that hasn't happened in Massachusetts yet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We had a question down here. Commissioner.
Just to say thank you for your leadership you provide, the concern you bring to the fight against anti-Semitism, and it's really grateful.
Thank you.
Commissioner Burton.
Just a brief question. I echo the thanks of my colleagues. You just referenced in part that you're waiting to see what comes out of this process. What would you recommend to this commission? And you very eloquently laid out some of the challenges or limitations on the board. What would you need, or what coming from the legislature would help you to overcome those challenges?
I'm very respectful of why the board is sort of an aggregator of things, because that's why I gave you my big history of who Horace Mann was and what he believed and why we have local control on a lot of levels. You know, when we go into districts, it should be targeted, and it hasn't been when we take a district over, for instance, in those cases. So I firmly believe that it would be really difficult for us to run all education is local, like all politics. It might have been local, according to Speaker O'Neill. We are trying to do something that has an aggregating, or that at least has some power to it. But again, you should be very careful about giving away power to anybody, because it can be turned anyway by any different government that comes in, right, by any leadership. So I am very appreciative of the balance of power that needs to happen between local, duly elected school committees and the Board of Education, which isn't, and the Department of Education, which is, you know, going on a lot of, it's a very large organization and has different foci points over the years, right? And it's basically, we're all a creation of the legislature. And so I respect sort of the life cycle of the Board of Ed, the life cycle of the department, and what the legislature can do. So my recommendation would be that I'm a big person for pilot programs, that things get sunsetted. I started the School Building Authority in Massachusetts, which had been a continually sunsetted program from 1948 until 2004, because we built all your schools, but then we'd have to scurry around Ways and Means looking for the amendments to keep it going beyond that. We only owed $20 billion at the time, so I guess we weren't going out of business. But the point is, having something that is able to be tested and see how it works with the districts is probably good advice that I could give, because it's really difficult. It takes years to get something up and running that really has the impact of the districts. Ed reform was passed in 1993, but wasn't fully realized until 2000. And so 7 years elapsed in between. And so that's why I think having pilot programs or things like that you could recommend or get some legislative direction to the board or to the department would be good. And having us be accountable for what comes out of that is really important as well. Having worked at Ways and Means for many years, I can tell you that we wrote a lot of things, we saw a lot of laws passed that we weren't sure how they actually got implemented. But implementation risk is really a big one, and you should be concerned about that with us too. So,
Thank you very much.
Other questions? Commissioner Friedman, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A couple questions for you. First, in terms of curriculum, what visibility does the board and DESE have into what's happening in districts and even in classrooms? And our concern, as you can imagine, is that, you know, there's a genocide education mandate. We've heard and we understand some people fervently believe that Israel's committing genocide now. Do we know that there's a teacher out there or not who might be using genocide education to say, okay, I want to talk about the current Gaza conflict? And if you don't have visibility, what are things that we should either propose or try to do ourselves?
Commissioner Friedman, we do not have the visibility into any of that. And it is only anecdotally that we hear things, and it's always terrible to make any kind of public policy based solely on anecdotes. So there should be some sort of way of collecting, auditing, or doing something like that. And I don't mean for the purposes of banning free speech or teacher extemporaneous comments or things like that, or someone mentioned about like being offended. It's not about, that's not the kind of thing. It should be very clear what's being looked at, right, when this audit is done, if that's the way that you're recommending something be done. But it has to balance free speech with what is clearly offensive and culturally biased information that's being marbled into curriculum, potentially out there. And I say potentially because we do not have that for this particular, we know what the frameworks say. We don't know how it's being implemented at the local level holistically. Similar, just like science of reading. So this is not related just to this topic. It's any issue that comes up before the board, because we are solely a frameworks organization. And that was the way that this department's constructed its accountability system by the legislature.
Thank you. My other question is, you talked at the end about what I would sort of characterize as almost a culture and attitude shift that makes sure that schools take this anti-Semitism problem truly seriously, that, you know, we pride ourselves on taking mistreatment of any vulnerable minority group seriously, but it doesn't seem like that's always the case with respect to Jewish people right now. And what are some of the ways that you think, this is a hard question, obviously, that we can do that? Is it a matter of convening all the superintendents and trainings? Is it a matter of clarifying definitions so that there's a clearer understanding that it's fine to criticize, Israeli government policy, but if you say, Zionists aren't welcome here, that does cross a line? Like, what are some of the ways we can try to change the attitude here and get every single district to take these problems as seriously as we take any other bullying or harassment?
I've given a lot of thought to that since this has come before the board. And it seems to me, especially from Commissioner Schuker's question, that trust and how we all work together going forward is really critically important when we have public meetings where every utterance is recorded. And to have something come out of that meeting that, as you point out, Commissioner Schuker, didn't happen, but stated as fact, is a reason for trust to be broken, right? That means that was not a reliable situation. So it's really important, and the Superintendent's Association meets periodically throughout the year, as does the school committee. They get together, and it's important, especially at the school committee level, because they hire the superintendents. So there's always been a lot of emphasis on the Mass Association of School Superintendents, but I refer to my former colleague Glenn Kuchar at the Mass Association of School Committees very frequently, because he knows that they hire the superintendents, and there's so much turnover in school committees that the level of the idea that someone's been there a long time and knows the ins and outs of running the school committee is not necessarily there. So I think that's a current and constant challenge. And school superintendents themselves, I think every couple of years we have 2/3 of them turn over. These are really demanding jobs. And so in other words, you're kind of dealing with a lot of new people in different districts all the time. And so it's really through those associations that I've had my best luck, not only as the chairman of the Board of Education, but more in my role with the School Building Authority, where we had to change culture and strategy fast. And that still took 2 or 3 years. So it's not an overnight thing, and it's not going to be something that immediately gets legislated and bought into. It's got to be something that we work with grassroots constituencies to understand, and also at least figure out where the truth is and not myth. And that's why I feel uncomfortable when it's only anecdotal evidence that I can share with you.
Thank you, Commissioner Friedman. I'm going to quickly raise one other thing that I meant to ask before. Before I do that, any other commissioners with a question? I want to be mindful of. Oh, okay. Can you discuss the board's oversight of training? You've already kind of alluded to this, but can you discuss the board's oversight of training or professional credit requirements for teachers, including whether or not webinars put on by the MTA and other groups will fulfill credit requirements for teachers?
It's a great question, Mr. Chairman, because I was actually mystified when I learned that the Teachers Association, which is a union, was providing professional development. So I thought that was very unusual. But I checked into this, and we don't have at the board level or department level any kind of approval rights or best practices. We certainly have some, again, recommendations for quality professional development, but it's not something, it's a very locally driven situation. So it's surprising.
So I understand this correctly. You have no eyes on this?
No. Other than initial teacher certification, where you take the MTEL test and become a teacher certified in Massachusetts from one of the programs that's been certified in Massachusetts. Once you're a teacher, the professional development, and again, I like to remind people, is the Commonwealth of Mass doesn't have any union contracts with the teachers' unions. We're not a party. We're not a partner on that level. That's not anything that we do. We don't negotiate on behalf of districts other than the receivership districts in Lawrence and Southbridge.
So teachers could be getting professional development credits to show up at these types of events where they're hearing this one-sided.
It's certainly
in the realm of possibility.
It's in the realm of possibility.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes.
I have one more. And I want to go back to reporting and how you have been able to touch on a number of anecdotal incidents and situations that have come up with respect to curriculum. In terms of making sure that those anecdotes actually get acted on. I both want to offer up that, reporting to ADL is one way where that can be counted, despite some commentary to the contrary earlier today. We do count that, and we count and act on that. And ADL also has a what we call a hotline that's staffed by lawyers in conjunction with the Brandeis Center and other organizations. So if there is some legal action or legal vetting for something that's happening, that is another avenue that's available. That might not help specifically what's coming into you, but it seems that it's something I want to amplify here, because there is recourse and there are ways for this data to be counted. And I think you made the really important point that if we don't count it, we don't know that it's happening.
Thank you. And again, there's the project resolution system that the department runs, and we try and make sure that all complaints go through there as well, because that's a way for the department to act on things through their own process and not relying on an external third party.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Commissioner, thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
for
I'm
your
only the
patience.
chairman. I'm the volunteer. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. I am going to thank everybody for your patience and your efforts. Thanks to everyone who came today and who's watching online. I'm going to move to adjourn our meeting.
Second.
All right. The meeting's adjourned.